Alright, how's it going, you guys? This is just a quick intro. We're going to be doing a bit of a live stream here, and as we wait for people to come in, if they do like just kind of prep things up, as people who are watching the recording at the moment can get a sense of what's going to go on. Live stream here on my Twitch channel at the moment. I will be answering questions and such through the Twitch channel, as you can find that under my handle Peterhanstyle. I am live streaming on the Instagram as well too, but again, for those of you that are joining there, you're going to want to jump to my Twitch stream if you want to ask questions. I'm going to be doing a commission actually. I have a couple of additional commissions I picked up that I have to actually draw out. So one of them actually is a request for 2 pieces, so I'm going to do one of them for the moment. And usually the requests of commissions end up being pertaining to certain characters or IPs or brands that, you know, obviously people love. So I don't normally do a lot of kind of like fan art and stuff like that, but I will do them for like commissions and such. So the one I'm going to do at the moment is actually coming from Princess Mononoke. So Mononoke Hime is going to be the one I focus on today. And I have 2 requests of the characters, the main ones, Ashitaka and of course the princess. So I'm actually going to do Ashitaka here for the moment. I have an idea as to what I want to do for the pose and whatnot. The actual princess, will I do it live right now? Probably not. I'll probably do it in another stream, or if anything, I might just kind of do it on my own. I have basically 2 additional requests I gotta do right in terms of the list of commissions I've been doing for the last month or so. These were just added on in the last kind of like a couple weeks, and I just completely had missed over it. Didn't see the list of that part, so I'm gonna go in here and finish this one up for the moment. The other one was for the a Star Wars piece. So again, I might potentially use that one to do a live stream in the future. So I'm going to just do a drawing, and let me just put stuff away a little bit. I have like paper napkins and paper all over the place because I'm going to be doing watercolor on this one as well too. So the watercolor I'm going to focus on or use will be the, grabbing the stuff here real quickly, the Schmink watercolor I'll be using here. I also do have my water brushes I'll be using. So I'll try to get to the watercolor today. I'll probably be on for about a good hour and a half, 2 hours, because as I talk and also draw, it does chew in a bit of time actually doing the piece. So just to give you an idea as to how some of these look for commissions that I'm doing at the moment, I get requests of like characters and such like this, right? This was from the Labyrinth character, the David Bowie character, the Goblin King. This is coming from the Matrix, you know, focusing on that one. Then I have another one over here, the Gandalf versus the creature from Mordor. Not Mordor, I'm sorry. Got that completely mixed up. Yeah, so this is the scene where it's under the bridge area where the dwarves are. Why am I forgetting the name of it all of a sudden? Damn it. For some reason, my memory of certain names of things like that have been skipping my head. It's so obvious, but I completely forgot. Anyways, so the Balrog, thank you. That's what it was. Here we have another one, which I actually am not familiar to this series at all, actually. It's the, I think it's the Digimon stuff, but I could be completely wrong. Anyways, I research it, I look up the characters and stuff like that, but some of them I don't really know as well compared to others. So I'm going to be doing the character Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke, and I plan to do, so the way I'm thinking of it right now is that it's a dual piece, so it'll be 2 actual illustrations. There'll be one over here, the one on this side, on the right hand side. So the one on the left will be Ashitaka. He'll be facing this direction, and so I'm going to have him pose this way. I'm going to go from about knee-high level up. So I don't want to be a full body, because if I kind of do full body, I don't necessarily get a good close-up shot of his head. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. He's going to be posing with his bow and arrow. In the background will be some graphical elements like his steed and stuff like this. Maybe some like vegetation of plants and whatnot. But it's a pose where I want it to be a nice kind of like combination of between him and the princess kind of facing towards each other. So whoever, you know, is, I don't know who exactly was commissioned for this stuff. I just saw the list of what it was. We'll receive it, so if they frame it, they can actually have it like next to each other. So anyways, let me just position this properly. I will try to answer questions as best I can. If questions on my Twitch stream, if I read them, I'll catch them, I'll try to answer them. If I miss it because you get scrolled through with a bunch of other stuff, I apologize. I'm not trying to skip questions. It's just that they get lost into this stream of all the stuff. Normally my Twitch stream doesn't have a large amount of people anyways, which is great for questions and answers because it keeps it a little bit easier to track while I'm actually working. So, what I'm going to do right now is just work on a couple of strokes and lines. I want to have him about here to about here. His steed is going to be over here with the horn going up that direction. He's going to come down here, so his shoulder will be out there. bow and arrow will come across this direction. I'm going to frame him interior-wise right there. So what I'm doing right now is just plotting out where things will go. So whenever you guys do drawings and try to strategize like your thoughts, you could do thumbnails, okay? So like preemptive thumbnails, sketching, all important stuff. You should do so. Do I have an exact picture in my head? I don't. Okay, so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I have an idea as to what the pose is going to be. So right now what I'm doing with my hands is trying to get a sense on the paper, projecting, you know, landmarks where obviously you can't see anything, but in my head I'm memorizing certain locations of things or where they can go. All right, so I'm just plotting essentially the information. Am I going to follow that exactly? Most likely not, but it's just an idea to kind of get things started. So I know that shoulder will be right about here. He's going to be looking up that direction, so now I have an idea to that. He's going to be wearing, this is the version where he's going to be wearing his hood. So let's put a couple of lines in here. This line right here, okay, now I'm going to zoom in a little bit on my Twitch stream so you can kind of start to see the drawing come to fruition. This line right here is very important, just that very first line. Mainly because what this does is it sets a couple of things. First is proportion. Proportion and size of the drawing. Scale. So by this action, if I drew a line that was largely arced, and what this line represents is the brim of his hood. Okay, so the brim of his hood. So I want to always establish one thing, just to set the scale and size of the drawing and the position of how he's going to be looking up. All of that is done with this single line right here. So now that I have the position of where his hood's going to face, I know that the hood actually wraps around his head over here, and the hood does go backwards to this position over here. And his head will be inside the hood. And there's like these two markings on the top, like this, like that. So as I also bring down the hood, it's going to be actually overlapping his face a little bit. And I know that there's a bit of a mask right here. And keep his face relatively simple for the moment. I know his brow is going to be up in this direction, here and here. But I won't draw on the face just yet. I want to save that out a little bit later on. So the tool I'm using at the moment is that PIGMA FB brush pen. And this one's a little bit drier, so I'm able to go in there with a slight bit of pressure, which gives me a very light line. It breaks up a little bit, but I'm not concerned about that. Mainly because if I bring in a fresher pen, it'll start to help solidify that line work. And that's what I want. I want there to be a bit of lightness to it, so I can kind of lay things in there to a degree. So now that I'm kind of starting to establish the scale of the position of where things will go, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. In Parchment, Steel asks on Twitch, when you get around to it, I have a question around drawing hands. Okay, we'll try to get to that point once we get there. Jack the Undying, any tips on posing from imagination? Giving a pose weight and good gesture seems like a good balancing act when not using reference. Yeah, I think definitely in terms of that, what I would suggest you also do is actually enact the pose. So get up and pose, you know? Of course, it's a very extreme pose. You would think, well, I can't really hold it. But you can actually get a sense of actually the movement as you are trying to find that, right? So let's say right now I'm trying to find the pose of him. He's going to be holding the bow and arrow. So in my head, I can visualize it. But physically, I can think about, well, his arm's going to be coming out over here. He's holding it with his left arm. The draw arm is on his right arm. And so how is he going to actually hold the bow and the arrow? So as the bow is positioned, he's going to be doing the thumb draw, which is what I've been doing a lot lately, shooting-wise. So when the thumb draws, the bow is being pulled back. You have the string connected this direction like this. So there's the bow. His hand's going to be clasped like that. And you wrap the thumb around the string and you hold it with your index finger like that, and the arrow is positioned here. So you're pinching the arrow against the actual wood of the bow, so it holds it in place. So this is a thumb draw, so your actual arrow is going to be shot like this. So now that I have it position of the hand, knowing that he's going to be drawing back like that, I get a visual of like how things are going to work, right? So getting up and actually doing this kind of stuff, physically moving, getting around, getting a sense of where things go, will really help quite dramatically, actually. It's much like even expressions. We do this with, like, you know, animators. They'll have mirrors and stuff like that, and actually get a sense of their expressions and, you know, whatnot. So there's a side skirt coming up this direction. It's kind of reading some of the stuff on Instagram if I can actually see any. Right now, again, for those of you that are joining on my Instagram, by the way, this is Dorm Pen, you're going to want to jump to my Twitch stream if you want to ask questions, because I would not be able to answer any of it there in the moment. So it's going to move that direction. The front little piece over here is going to move over here. This side, there's another piece on this end. In terms of the question that I got just right now about going up a little bit, tips on folds. Think of folds of clothing like ribbons. Okay, so elongated ribbons and how they can be S curves and stuff like that, but they can also be folded on top of each other. Those are the two main actions of clothing. Think of hard edge folds and then things like S curves as they sweep around. Referencing and of course visualizing actual clothing is important. So don't just try to make it up, look at it. Again, sit up still life, put up your own little cloth or shirt somewhere on a chair and see how the actual gravity of that fabric wraps around those things, Let's see, I'm going to go down a little bit and so to continue on with that idea of posing, and for learning purposes, that doesn't defeat the purpose of not using reference. No, you should be always using reference, no matter what. No matter what. Question I get from Ryusekai is, would you say that drawing comic manga pages helped improve your draftsmanship? I've never drawn comic pages or manga, even before, so I've only drawn pages of comics recently, in the last couple of years, because of my own comic, graphic novel. Before that, I did mainly design. So I thought about the visual look of the characters. I thought about the world building aspect to it. That was what I was focusing on. That was my forte, I guess, of interest. But actually going for graphic novel pages was not the thing I did. So did it help me? Well, I had to have strong draftsmanship skills to be able to do those pages in the first place. So I don't know if it really helped me. It definitely enlightened me to things in terms of what I need to continue to improve on, right? So the arm's going to come this direction forward. He's got this long sleeve on. Coming up this direction. Let me just establish a couple things. I'll come back to some of the questions in just a second. I'm trying to visualize and think about where I want everything at the moment. So I know that the hand's going to cover the bow over here. The bow will kind of extend past these points, but I'm actually going to contain him within a frame because there's so many extensions of things. So I don't want to go off the end of the page. So what I'm going to do is frame it internally with a graphic, and so that way anything that goes outside of those areas can be blocked off, essentially. And so that will make it feel more composed and deliberate, because I wanted to be able to frame him in closer so I can see more details. I could have drawn a full body, but then of course we have to pull out a little bit. We have less information. So I made a decision to do so. Let's see. The arm comes down over here. Let's position just where the hand is going to be. I know that he had like this string piece that went around the arm. So as you hold the bow, typically with the classic Asian bows, it kind of presses against the palm, and your last three fingers come in, you wrap your thumb around it, and your index finger is more like a point, so you kind of point it like an arrow like this. So I'm going to bring his index finger forward a little bit, and his other fingers I'm going to grip together like that, and his bow is going to come out from over here, and the other hand is going to be behind this portion, so the bow will go that direction, there, and the arrow will be resting typically on the thumb, on the inside right there, that portion. What's interesting is that I did look at some of the images for just referencing of the character recently, before the stream, just to get a sense again of like what he wore and whatnot. But what was kind of cool, again, like recently in the last couple of months and such, I've been doing a lot of just archery myself because I find it fun. And what was cool about it is just discovering more of the roots of Asian archery, and from Mongol to Korean to Chinese to Japanese, and seeing how that thumb draw was used mostly for horseback. And what was cool as I was looking at some of the reference images from the movie Mononoke Hime, is that Ashitaka also did a lot of thumb draw stuff. And as you know, someone who's not really into archery in the beginning or didn't really know about it, you wouldn't even recognize that kind of stuff, you know. So that was actually kind of interesting because he kept it pretty accurate. He actually was drawing it in that way. There are a couple of instances where he's holding it from the Mediterranean draw. So it was actually the three fingers around the string like that. You know, holding it this other direction. But that was only when he was actually turning the bow and on the ways to rest it. So those kind of details that the people were doing at Ghibli was pretty stunning. Didn't even realize that stuff. Small little things you would catch that you wouldn't even know about, but they were considering it. Let's see, a couple of questions. Commonly referred, so Ink Parchment is asking something about refer to them as a second devil because, oh, I'm sorry, I must have missed something above. Something about hands, okay, that's right. Refer to them as a second devil because I have such a hard time keeping it in proportion to the rest of the body. I'm also aware of the golden ratio, you know, the 1:1, 1.168. So yeah, very, you know, exact numbers that I don't even really use, but I still can't seem to put it into practice. Well, this is where I think a lot of observational drawing really becomes a key factor. Being able to see things in real space and real placement important. So drawing in your own hands or somebody else's hands, finding references and stuff like that can be crucial. But again, you gotta. It's a lot of repetition, if anything else, because it's so easy to misproportion things because you're going by eye. Like you can say, I know the golden ratio, but how do you apply it to the drawing, right? Are you going to go up there and actually measure out all the numbers and then transfer it down to the page? Of course not, right? So everything is done through eye. And you can say, well, I use tools. Like I can use my pencil to kind of measure things out here and there. True. But you're still eyeing it, essentially, you know? So here we have to basically eye the proportion from different areas and elements, but I'm going to be using the context of the other parts of the anatomy to help me understand that part, you know? So he's going to hold the bow this way, but he's going to pull that direction, just kind of get a sense of like how he will hold it. So yeah, his forearm would come down, so it's going to be underneath. So that means his other hand's going to be over here. Thumb will be behind that section. Index finger will be wrapped around. This is just him holding the arrow. He's not actually going to be drawing it. So that's why I don't have to be overly concerned about where the string is positioned. It's like he's about to knock it or something like that. So his other form's going to come back direction. Shoulder's going to be over here. There's a bit of the cloth that wraps around it. His front tunic has a fold. Wraps underneath like here. Again, some of this stuff might be a little bit abstracted at the moment for a lot of viewers, but for me, like I can kind of see where things are being positioned. I know they had a sash down over here, and the bow is going to continue to wrap this direction. And all this so far is feeling fine. Okay. Going this direction for the bow. Arrow's going to come out. I know it's below the screen, so I'll just stop right there for the moment. But let's go down to the lower skirt area where the cloth continues, and also behind. We'll stop there at the moment. Frame's going to start here and about here. So I might bring in a hard edge and draw around this section, because as the bow kind of comes out, I'm going to mark it here. As the bow continues this way, I'm going to mark it here. So it's the end of my position here, frame as it goes around, up top and below. Now I kind of know where things are. Oops, sorry, people on Instagram. So now that I have a general position of everything in place, I'm going to go back up to the head and the face of this character, and I'm not going to try to draw it in a Ghibli style, but there'll be some things that might feel familiar to a degree. Some things will be drawn in definedly, other parts will be kind of more suggestive, because when I bring in the watercolor, I can start to define those things. Because I'm doing watercolor, it's so easy to overdo the drawing. So being able to keep yourself in check can be difficult. I'm going to bring in the other tool now. It's a little bit more ink into this and start to push in on some just dark areas, shadow shapes. Some of the line weight around it. Let me just see if there are any other questions below on the Instagram. I'm not Instagram, sorry, Twitch. What are some art books you looked at when you were younger, if you remember the names? Art books? I mean, there were so many. For one, for sure, maybe not when I was super young, maybe in my 20s or so, I was really into, and I still am, into Katsuya Terada's work. Terada is an artist, who's been around for many, many years. Worked in things like illustration, comics, animes, and stuff like this. And he had an awesome couple of books that he produced back then in the early 2000s, late 90s. There were these 1,000-page sketchbooks that he would produce. He also put a couple books out on digital painting. There was one for a program that he uses mainly, Corel Painter, which I used to look at, which is kind of hard to find and rare. So Terada was actually a big inspiration of mine during the time when I was in college, in my mid-20s, early 20s, I would say. And he used to, imitate his look, his line, his aesthetics, his painting style. And I don't necessarily have any of that stuff left over in my work as a huge portion, but definitely remnants of it still exists, especially with the way he draws lines and certain kinds of forms. But I don't necessarily go for his visual styling much at all, but I still favor his work quite a bit. It's quite fun to look at still. Question from Rusika is again, what's your advice to aspiring artist who wants to make a great living? Well, I mean, to make a great living, it seems like you have to make a lot of money, right? And yeah, of course, we need to make an income to have daily necessities of things. So there's nothing wrong with having a career and finding a good job and looking for a job security of things. However, at the same time, I think there's a difference in how we can consider, what a great living might be. So you can make a lot of money potentially in the world of commercial art or design. It's possible. I've done it. Many other friends have done it. Still do it. But does that mean you're going to make is that a great kind of living, right, is the question. I know it's a bit of a deeper question of what is it you really want to do and will it make you happy? So keep that in consideration. Are you doing this because it's just something of a job that that you can break into to become, famous, popular, or make a lot of money? If you really want to do that, there are many other fields that might be a little bit easier, because the time required to build a skill to become to that level takes so much effort and time that it, again, like I said, doesn't seem very practical really. Where if you said, I just want to make a lot of money, you can go into real estate or business, right? If you want to become famous, you can try to become social media thing, whatever case is, or whatever. Which in their own right are all difficult things as well. But I'm just saying their focus and intentions are maybe a little bit different. So it's up to you in terms of what it is you want to focus on. Is it more the income aspect to it, which is what a great living might be for you, or not? But yes, they both can happen. You can make a good monetary living, but also make and be happy with the living that you have. But what are some of the advices towards that? I think again, find out first what your your goal set is in terms of your direction as to what that might be first, maybe a little bit. But I would say another aspect to it is the drive. You got to have that, very, very powerful, strong drive that pulls you in that direction, that this is the only thing you could ever see yourself doing for the rest of your life. Because if you are unable to find that, someone next to you has. And they're willing to put themselves through, the amount of work necessary to potentially achieve that. And if you don't have that hunger, that drive internally, you're not going to make it. Simple as that. in this field, that is, let's see, a couple of questions. How would you avoid same face syndrome when drawing people? Yeah, I think that's a big issue in terms of like when you draw a character, they tend to all look the same. This is where studying, actual anatomy would be helpful. But this is also because like in this particular face, like in the Ghibli format or an anime format, they kind of have that inherent problem, is that all the characters kind of look the same. So as I draw something more simplified, the amount of options as to what you can adjust is somewhat limited, right? And if you do change it, it's quite dramatic, but they still follow somewhat of a pattern. And that's the problem of simplification. Things are limited in terms of what you could push. The more realistic information there is, there's a lot more options of manipulation of proportion, details, whatever the case is. Expression is a big thing, but I think at the end of the day, knowing who your character is, right? So is this character, whatever age this person is at, what kind of personality does this person hold? Based on that, I think the face can potentially break that problem because you'll be able to actually express who that character is. So invoke who the character is supposed to be, maybe mentally, even physically to a degree. Again, like I said, holding poses, thinking about the way the character would just move. A lot of things that what animators do, I think, can be used directly towards, illustrations or mangas and comics and whatever the case is. Right now, I'm just kind of punching in a couple of dark spots here and there. Like I said, some of the stuff up here will start to work a little bit clearer once I get to the watercolor. I'm leaving it very general, open and loose at the moment, but I'm not super concerned about refined exact details just yet because I'm going to do a lot of watercolor for it. And welcome anybody who's on Twitch right now joining in. You're welcome to ask questions. If I do miss it, do apologize. I'll try to scroll up a little bit and see if I can find any. I have to scroll down a little bit right now, so I may miss a few here and there. The question from Hans is that I commonly refer to them as... Okay, I just saw that one already. Sorry. Can you talk about a bit about design, like the principles and stuff, like big, medium, and small? It seems to me pretty hard to find content about that subject matter. It's from Miguel Brum. And you're right. Finding content, let's say like a book format, about design fundamentals or design theory, especially in entertainment arts, is not really prevalent. You'll find design books that pertain to things like architecture or industrial design or fashion. Never really in things like this. You'll find like a character design book, but that's specific to character design. I'm talking about design fundamental as a whole. We just got a mention of this comment of a question of like the big, medium, small. That's an idea about how to actually control ratios within forms to create an ideal or aesthetic combination of the things, where they don't really feel flat or stale or repetitive. And you're able to control it pertaining to the design of the character's necessary functions. And it's a deep or a large question because there's just so much to talk about it. So the class I instruct under my own platform, I call design thinking, kind of touches upon these areas. I'm not going to say that I'm this, master designer or anything like that. There are people out there that work in the industry who, design amazingly, especially within characters and props and vehicles. But still there is a standard. There's a common understanding within all fields that what we work in at the baseline degree, which I would say, I'm familiar to. So I'm able to understand how to play with those things, the idea of how to use design, manipulate it to the character or otherwise. But I can't necessarily get into every aspect of it right now. But what I can say is like maybe a little bit on it, like the principles and such. It's not so much on the visual drawing. It comes back down to the strategy and the thinking. How you even research, right? How you gather your thoughts on how to actually plot out what this design is supposed to be. Intention is very huge. But the research part of it is also really big. And you might think, well, the research is gathering references, but it's so much more than that. It's not just about going on to Google or Pinterest or looking for other artists' inspiration, just saying, I have all these great images and it's going to give me all the necessary elements to be able to put together my own design of a character. But it's not, okay? What you'll end up doing then is regurgitating the same thing that person's done. And you don't want to necessarily do this because, again, people look at it and say, oh, that's just that character. And I'm pretty sure it's pretty obvious as to what I'm talking about for most people here that are listening on. But to create your own unique character is having an understanding of who that character is. Like, what are you trying to design? Maybe not even a character. Let's say it's a prop or even a creature. What is that creature? How does it function? Where does it live? What does a male and a female version look like? What's their growth cycle? Do you know the general anatomy of things? But again, what is it applied for? Not even just about the world and the functions, but then about the content. What kind of medium? Is it for a game? Is it for an illustration? Is it for an animation? Each of those have different problem-solving elements to them, right? If it's a game, I have to think about the gameplay. Well, how do I fight this creature and monster? If it's a comic, it's more about the storytelling aspect to it, right? I mean, all of it ends up being storytelling, of course, but the idea of interaction, how the audience engages with that thing, needs to be thought about. So I have to research the things that are out there that parallel it. I have to research the visuals that need to give you something that is recognizable, yet potentially could be fun and unique or fresh as a take. So those are some things that consider. Is that then of course you have to actually visually draw it, right? So this is where then your skill sets need to back it up and whatnot. But like I said, that in itself is not enough. How you go about thinking about this stuff, engaging with other people to give you more ideas. Again, that research is so huge. Research itself is an art form, in my opinion, and it takes time to really build that sensitivity of what you're looking at. Question, this kind of adds to this. This is a question from T-Foodie, is when it comes to shape language then, is there any specific method you have for finding new or interesting shapes? So shape language would be, if I, let's say, give you an example. I mean, what is shape? It's just a visual icon, right? A graphic. And it's something that's either going to be round or hard-edged. Circles, squares, triangles. And we see those in the shape languages when how I build them in the dynamic sketching class, right? Because I say we build everything through form, simplistic form. So shape is two-dimensional, form is three-dimensional. Shape at the basic primitive is triangle, circle, and square. In terms of three-dimensional form, we can take those three shapes and turn them into sphere, cube, cone, pyramid, and cylinder. 5 forms, that's primitive. You can then, manipulate them a little bit to find different kinds of angles and slants and whatnot. But at the end of the day, those are the 3 primitive shapes you have to play with. Now you can just say, I'm going to use these shapes. The question still is why? Why do you want to use those shapes in the first place? What are you trying to tell us as a viewer? And if you're not thinking of it that way and only thinking about the visual, of how cool it can look, well, what makes it cool, right? Why is this character supposed to be cool in the first place, right? So to dictate the shape, you have to understand what you're trying to design through, obviously, writing, research, coming up with something, your idea, the concept. That's where it just kind of initially begins, as always, doesn't it? An idea, a thought as to what you want to actually visually create. But that's hard in itself, because then you ask yourself, well, what do I want to create? Well, that's up to you. You are the artist and designer. You're the one who has to come up with some way to visually, birth something that is not going to be something that is maybe overly played, maybe it feels overly done. And everybody asks that question, but I want something original. Well, there is really no original. The idea is, how do I put things together in ways of thinking that makes it a fresh take on that? Because everything is always somewhat familiar, whether it's based on a culture and history, whether it's based on a storyline and mythology, whether it's some sort of like I said, an amalgamation of things we've seen before, reconfigured again in some other manner. So in terms of shape language, like I said, knowing who your character is and knowing what your design is, and then choosing the appropriate shapes that back it up and expresses it, right? And you might think, well, what does that even mean? Well, shapes mean something. They visually communicate to people. That's our first actions, what we can do. A line that generates a shape. That shape we can convert into a form based on how we turn lines and shadows and volume and light. But the action of what we put on the page has to be dictated by the idea. So again, writing is a big part of it. And all those things. And if you don't really write stuff down, well, you're missing a part of research and a part of the creative process that I think a lot of other artists will do. But yeah, from that shape language, again, those shapes will say something. Much like color. Color is something we're not really talking about. Design-wise, we're talking about shapes, but design is also associated with color. How I combine the colors or use certain colors can express certain things, right? We can understand an emotional attachment to color within how we things we see in culture and history. And we can apply them to our characters and how the audience should respond to them. But the shape language can also do that as well too, right? Combine shape, story, color all together, all of a sudden you might have something interesting visually. Question here I get is from Ink Parchment. Painting isn't your strongest area. May I ask why you choose watercolor and not other mediums? Because of the mobility. So I used to travel quite a bit, internationally, doing workshops in local schools and whatever the case is. So being able to move around and still paint, watercolor was such a, I don't know if that's the right expression, but it was the go-to for me, mainly because it was just that mobility sense. I can carry it with me in my bag. I can just kind of pull it out on location, start painting real quickly. It was fast for me. It focused more onto the drawing because the watercolor was there to support the drawing. It wasn't about really painting. You know, it was more about the drawing. I get a question here from It's Honey Milk is, how often do you draw digitally? Quite often, but mainly for client work. So if I'm working on, let's say, a freelance job or something like this, I'll do a lot of digital painting or coloring, or not coloring, I'm sorry, drawing. Personally, I do mostly traditional, personally, because not to say that it's better, but I prefer it. Both mediums are great, and both tools are necessary, but it's all dependent on situational as to what I'm working on. Let's see, a couple last questions over here. Now we're caught up to the current. What do you think about studying stylized anime characters by copying the structure next to the reference image into basic shapes such as cubes, cylinders, and all that kind of stuff? How useful is that in your opinion? I think studying any style set of your interest is also a great exercise. The problem is when you get stuck into it, right? You kind of corner yourself into only just being able to do that. So the idea is to balance things like early fundamentals, you know, basic drawing figure techniques, or perspective and still life, understanding light and shadow, and also studying stylized stuff at the same time. And the reason why I say this is because that is what I did. When I was younger, as a kid, up into high school, going to my 20s, I used to imitate, study, stylized art all the time. Comics, animes, you know, mangas and all that kind of stuff. And I used to draw just like people like Terada, or people like, you know, who's that? Otomo, or Akira Toriyama, or whatever the case is, right? Nothing wrong with that kind of stuff. But the problem is, there's a time and a place to imitate, and you got to be able to then transition and use that in application. What do I like about it? Can I actually make solid decisions or choices of what I think is positive and negative, and recombine them in certain ways that becomes then a method for me to have a voice? So to find style is to build taste. To build taste, you got to actually try many things, right? And the comparison helps you then hone in on exactly what makes you feel that makes it you. But it's always built on things you may have seen, experienced, but everything in that sense of art is the same way. You look at somebody else's work and they'll say, well, that's what I was looking at over here. Guys like Katsuya Terada would say, my main inspiration was Mobius. For him, that's what he always says. And his work is very close to Mobius. But is it still not Terada's voice? Because in ways of how he's actually been able to recombine it in ways of his own aesthetic? Of course. I can easily recognize Terada's work and easily recognize Mobius's work. Yet they have overlaps between them. Excuse me if I'm talking very quickly. It's just that whenever I have a thought in my head and I'm trying to answer a question, especially in the streaming method, because of the constant stream of questions, I want to try to get it out as quick as possible. So my brain tends to work at 100 miles an hour. So as I'm drawing and talking and thinking of the question in ways of being able to express it clearly as I can, I tend to quite be quick about my speech. So I'll try to slow it down a little bit if necessary, or if anybody here feels like, oh, this is too quick here, can you slow it down just a bit? I would try to do so. Again, for anybody who's on the Instagram at the moment, I appreciate you guys being there, but you can definitely jump onto my Twitch channel if you want to ask any questions. This is just for you guys to watch over there. So right now I'm just kind of blocking the rest of the shadows. I'm actually almost done with him, so I'm going to move into the background here real soon. In the background we'll kind of have things like trees and vegetation. I'm going to bring his stag in here. So I'm going to put it probably, you know what, now that I have it, I'm going to put him on this side because I have a lot more room over here. So I'll put the stag, but the horn going that direction. More of a side view for anything else. A couple questions above. Sergeant Solace is asking, I have a question I have for you is that how important do you think critiques are? If we are self-taught, where do we go for feedback? Is it good enough to get feedback from other students in the community, or should we seek out good teachers, even if money is tight? It's a good question. Very good question, actually. A very mature question. The idea of critiques, it seems obvious. Like, yeah, I should be, getting information and feedback from the work that I'm doing. Only way to improve is to understand the things I may not be seeing. Because you can work on your own, self-educating, looking at books and tutorials, but after looking at it for so long, you don't necessarily catch the things that may not be working as well. Compositionally, form, proportion, whatever it is you're working on. So you have to have an extra set of eyes that might either be experienced or at least just fresh, right? Because one person might be working on one thing more than you are. That doesn't mean that they're a professional, nor even an instructor, but everybody has their own directions of experience, whether you may just begun. So right now, Sergeant Solace, let's say you focus more on proportion of human figure. Great. But then somebody else might have been focusing on human figure, let's say not on proportion, but more on muscle. They might look at your overall composition or image of the human form, and they'll say your proportion, I don't have that much feedback on, but I can tell you a few things about muscles. The idea is not to like, throw in negative comments of like, oh, I think that strong doesn't look very good, so you should start over. That's not it at all. We're looking for constructive criticism. I like where you're going with this piece. I think it looks great in position, but there's a couple things on the muscle that would be twisted over here just a little bit. I would suggest maybe think about maybe moving that a little bit. Simple as that. You might think, okay, I can maybe move that. The common response is, oh, thank you, and maybe that's the thing you want to say. But other people can take that very personally, and they'll say, well, that's just my style, or I don't know what you're talking about. Who are you to say anything about this? Well, then why are you putting yourself out there to get any kind of feedback if you're not going to take it, right? And you should be open for that stuff. And people are going to come in here and maybe say like, well, I think your drawing feels a little bit off in style. It doesn't really look like Ashitaka. I was like, that's fine. I'm doing the best that I can. And you're not going to please everybody, right? That's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to satisfy anyone here that's watching along. Okay, this is for someone else as a commission request. I'm just here to interact and hang out and chat. So if anybody's also drawing with me, great. That's all we're here for. We're just a community of artists that are just trying to do the things we do. If I asked for feedback, I hope I get some, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm just drawing the best I can. If anybody takes it in their initiative to say, can I give you some feedback? I could easily say no. I could also say yes. But it's based on intention and based on where and what I'm looking for. So once you feel like you're ready for some feedback, then request it, But you don't have to necessarily expect it all the time, and nor should you also just step in there and just give it to somebody if they're not asking for it. It's one of those situations where it can be very sensitive, and you would want to be, because wouldn't you want that for yourself as well, right? So just kind of think of yourself in a position where somebody's putting work out there. How would you want to have people respond? Not always about, oh, that's great, keep going. And it's not even about tearing it apart. It's just about, well, what do you just think? There's some things that can maybe like adjust a little bit here and there to assist to move along. Not to say you got to start over. This is terrible. And so this is where sometimes the instructors from the past and the day is the way they used to teach. So I get requests all the time from certain students by saying, when you give me feedback, just tear it apart. Just give me everything about that's horrible about it, and I'll start over. It's like, well, how's that really going to help you? It's like, yeah, you can start over and you can do a better piece potentially, but mentally, where's that going to put you? Because into the future, now all you're looking for then is everything that's wrong about your piece. But what you should be looking at is that what are things that we can move forward to adjust, but you also have to recognize what are things that are good, right? And so if I can find good things about it, well then can I stay consistent to that good feedback? I think your position over here, the pose, is awesome. Keep that up. It's like, okay, that worked out really well. I'll carry it over to the next piece. But I felt like your line was a bit too busy on this area. Oh, okay, it's a bit cluttered. Let me clean it up next time. So looking for the things that are working and not working to a degree, and being able to then carry it over to the next piece. But is it good enough to get feedback from other students in the community? I kind of answer that based on the fact that, again, like I said, we have sets of eyes that are fresh, and people are all looking at unique things based on their interest or experience level. So yeah, I think it can be very helpful, because if, let's say, I don't have the money to afford, let's say, a full class or a school or whatever the case is, and would I still recommend it? Absolutely, for sure. Because having there someone in hand to show you, whether it's online or not, to verbally describe to you their thoughts is crucial, in my opinion. Okay, it's not just about feedback to get it to improve, but it's also building the sense of networking, being able to understand and know people, saying, okay, well, you're working on something I really like, and here's my thoughts, and you're showing me some stuff that I think your thoughts are great, so we form a network, and you start to have a tie that you build towards into the future. Friends can happen, right? Communities can happen, and you need this. Because if you just go on it on your own, thinking, I'm just going to watch tutorial videos, I'm going to read books, I don't really need anybody else for that kind of stuff. Or you're afraid to share it. My work is not good enough, though. I feel like they're going to just tear it apart horribly. Or they're afraid of it online. People are going to troll it, or they're going to make, horrible comments and stuff like this. I understand. Those are legitimate, fears of anxiety, of things, of exposing yourself. Because you're essentially presenting a piece of you out there. And so when you feel a bit attacked, it kind of makes you close up like a snail, and only in time and practice can you actually, be more open to this. But to break that ice a little bit, sometimes you just have to kind of commit and just try. And hopefully you have a relatively good comment or encouragement that you're able to then recognize, like, hey, this is actually very valuable. But I also understand that it's not the case for everybody. Sometimes people do have a bad experience in this. And hopefully what can happen is that in time you will feel better, more confident, and you'll try again, you know. But you just have to find the right group of people. And I think that's a huge aspect to it. But not everybody's that lucky. I was. But I know that not everybody is. Let's see, Danny7715 is asking, when you are doing a study of something, but you know you did something wrong, like your perspective was off a little bit, or the relationship between forms are off here and there, do you continue with the same drawing, or do you start a new one? Another good question. In that situation, it takes a bit of maturity of developing your skill set to really recognize when you should move forward or when you should not. If it is something based on perspective and proportion, more than likely, you should start over, okay? But at a certain point, if it's at the very beginning, if you apply, let's say, the most simplest of line and shape and form, you still have a room, a threshold to be able to actually adjust things to a degree. But once you start to commit to things like details, hatching, shadows, darks, that's at that point where you can't really change it, you know? So I would start over at that point before you invest even more time into this. But that's why the early initial setup is the most crucial part. The details don't matter, okay? Because the underlying structure is the most important part. If that can work, everything else on top of that should hopefully continue to stay true. But if my early foundation, I'm still quite unsure, then you're going to have a bit of a rocky kind of later period. But you might still not necessarily fully know at the very beginning. How could you if you're just kind of still beginning in this part? But this is where time comes in, and through experience, you just start to get a sense of it, right? But yeah, there is definitely a point in which you should stop and start over. But still, vice versa, to argue this point, I think another aspect to that is to just see it through to the end, no matter what. Because once you take it to that finish, you can look at it and be like, well, that didn't really work out. You know, I tried to solve it, it didn't really work out, but I can still look at it and remind me. Not to remind you of the things that didn't work, but to remind you of what can be carried over that can be good, right? But also seeing things to the end to finish them. Whenever you start it, just try to finish it. Just see what happens. There can be a point where you feel like, oh man, this is not really going well, but this is your brain also trying to tell you, you're not doing what, you're not doing well, or you suck, or this is something that people are going to say this. Your brain's trying to convince you that it's not good enough, right? Where it could be just fine. It's just that your eyes and how it's being interpreted is just overthought. And so when somebody else might look at it and be like, it looks great, you know? And once you hear that feedback, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I was just overthinking this part. And this is where then the feedback becomes important. But if it wasn't working well, live and learn. Do it again. Miguel, if you have a certain question about references, ask me, okay? Question here from Drew Ray Art. Sounds interesting. I am 33, and I found love for drawing the past 2 years ago. I want to be a concept artist and illustrator, which you got to understand the difference of those two things, by the way. Any advice on being patient but urgent enough to progress correctly? First things first, be careful of that thought, you know, the idea of how to progress correctly. Is there a correct way to progress? In my personal opinion, it's a yes and no kind of thing, but I think there's a time and a place where you have to establish your correctness of path. In the beginning, it should be about exploration, the explorative nature of what it is that's out there, from a technique to a method to the careers, the industry, to research, to understand more about it. But you might say in response, but I'm 33. I'm too old to do that kind of stuff. But you're not, okay? So age doesn't matter in this situation. It's about understanding and having a clear view of all the possibilities before you say, okay, now how do I learn correctly about the kind of classes I take, the method of how much time I put in, you know, things I balance. But if you just go in there directly by saying, I want to be a concept artist and illustrator, without really knowing what those things even are, and you go down that path and you all of a sudden realize, well, this is not what I really wanted to do in the first place. Well, you should spend a bit more time in the beginning, you know, really thinking about what it is that's out there that you need to eventually, you know, settle down and think about that direct line of taking the courses and necessary methods of whatever you're going to be doing, whether it's educational through school, books that you're going to read, or people you learn under as a mentorship or something like this, you know? I know this is not something that people want to hear sometimes because they feel like, well, I need to get out there and start working. You know, I need to start making, you know, a living, or I just want to, you know, I don't want to be too late kind of stuff. But again, that's the wrong kind of thinking, because with that thought, it never goes away. This idea of like, I got to keep pushing more and more and faster, because you see everyone else around you potentially getting better, or they are already better. So you get this sense of urgency and this rushness of things. This is where then you will trip and fall, you know. You might get jaded, you might get burnt out, all of a sudden you fall out of love with this stuff, and then it becomes another job, you know. So, But in terms of the question at the bottom, which is about any advice on being patient but urgent enough to progress, correctly, the patience of it is, again, like I said, it comes down to people having a good community again. If you're by yourself, you stew in this contained environment in your room and behind the computer, and all of a sudden you're just looking only at social media, things like ArtStation, and you're just being overly inundated with all that information. You're like, man, I got to catch up to this. I got to keep moving faster. But if you see other people that are going through the same mud as you are, knowing how difficult it is, it makes you understand the context of how much time it takes to get there. So finding experienced people and inexperienced people at the same time. This is where classes in school become so important, because you can't do it on your own, right? As I always say. I hope that helps a little bit in terms of clarifying that question. I don't know if it does exactly, but I'm looking for more questions right now. How do you manage burnout? Well, I think balance is truly key. Balance of things that you do as, let's say, a hobby or personal interest, and of course, the balance of the actual work you invest to get your skills to a certain level of competition, right? But then how do you manage the burnout if, let's say, it does happen? Well, this is first you got to be able to recognize that you're in a burnout mode. And in that, you don't want to panic. It's like, man, I can't really. You get more stressed out. That stress becomes toxic. It affects your physical, your mental, social aspects of relationships and things. So recognizing it first is the only way. And from there, of course, you can't try to rush by saying, I gotta just work harder. I gotta do more. And maybe I'll get out of that burn. That's not, I'm sure you can understand, it's not really gonna help. So I think another aspect to it is being patient, as a word that's been popped up a little bit here and there today. But also recognizing that it's okay to be burned out, because everybody goes through it. So there's going to be a period where you have to kind of step back a little bit, look at the big picture, even ask big questions of like, well, what am I really trying to do? Like, what's my general path? How much do I really like doing what I'm doing at the moment? Earlier on, those questions are really hard to answer, because you're like, well, I'm super interested in this, but I don't know if where this is going to take me. It's such a risk at the moment. I know this is a much bigger question than the whole concept of like, how do you manage a burnout? Simply, it could just be about just distract your brain a little bit, do some other stuff, get into different kinds of hobbies that can kind of reignite that creativity or interest of passion of wanting to always generate something. So whether it could be more focused towards something personal, maybe working out physically, sports kind of stuff, hobbies of other things, watching a lot of movies, reading a lot of books, that can kind of stimulate this. I think that's a big aspect, because I do a lot of that. I haven't gotten to burnout in forever, but I'm always engaging in other things, so I don't necessarily get into that pocket, right? I hope that makes sense to a degree. So I'm going to actually put in his stag, the ride. I don't remember the name of that equine animal that he has in the movie, but hold on, let me just move my stream a little bit further down for the questions. Liz is asking, is your book, The Dynamic Bible, helpful for artists at all levels? I would assume so. I've had students from all walks of life come into my class. Some that were professionals, some that had no experience in drawing at all. And everybody seems to enjoy it to a degree. I'm not going to say that everyone is going to be as satisfied as I would like them to be, but it's all dependent on then how much you push, how much engagement you put into it, the participation, the level of enthusiasm, recognizing where your strengths are and weaknesses are, that kind of stuff too. But from there, hopefully in time, with patience, you're able to achieve the things you want to be able to have. And that book covers it does cover general fundamental aspects, but it's not going to give you the tell-all everything. It's not a perspective book. It's not a figure drawing book. There are many other areas in drawing and draftsmanship you have to learn, and this is Dynamic Bible is just one aspect to it. Coming from a stemming of a method from my instructor from Art Center. It can be great, and I find it useful because in my everyday kind of drawing, I do use those methods quite a bit. But like I said, it's not for everyone. Like anything we pursue, it's not built for everybody. But only way to find out is to try. I tried to bring the cost down of the book as much as possible too, so that way it can be more affordable for people. The new book that I have out, the Dynamic Bible, I know it's kind of hard to get right now for some people at the moment. It's still back-ordered in some places, but superranius.com does still have it. If you're in the U.S., that's the best place to get it. Internationally, Libri Distri, BERDISTRI.com has it, but they only just got their shipments in. So this was a pre-order run from last year. So some people have been waiting months, but that's because it was a pre-order. Let's see. I'm going to kind of scroll down a little bit, so if I miss some questions, I apologize. Just ask it again. Question here from True Boy Drian is, do you have any advice on drawing without any references, or like drawing with your imagination? Well, it comes from drawing more from reference, you know? Without actually having seen it, it's going to be really hard to create something out of your imagination because you don't have anything there to pull from. So the more you look at things from references or life as well too, it will help build a stronger imagination. That in itself can be a bit of a muscle, right? So yes, of course, you do have to spend the time to really push the imaginative skills, and some people seem to be more adept and born with being able to do that. But I think it's trainable to a degree. But it does, again, like I said, start with being able to recognize the fact that if you lack a strong visual vocabulary, you're not really going to have a lot to play with there. So get into the mode of actually looking at the real world, right? Hold on, I'm going to just kind of establish a couple things over here with this animal. Kind of stylize them a little bit more. I want to make those horns even larger than what is in the movie. I'll put another one back over here. See other couple questions here. Let's see. Again, thank you for all the comments here and there. Appreciate that. Recognizing some nays. Welcome back. I haven't done a live stream drawing in a long time. So, well, the last one I did was that PlayStation 5 cover, and that was, again, several weeks ago already. It seems like just the other day for me, honestly. But it has been a minute. Let me just establish a couple more things here before we go back to some of the questions. And people that are watching on Instagram, again, I do appreciate you guys hanging out over there. There's a fair amount of people, so I'm sure most of them are just kind of watching in the background. But if you do have questions, as again, go into my Twitch stream to jump in there free, and you guys can ask questions on that part if you'd like to. I'm just making sure it's running. I'm not actually seeing any questions on the actual Instagram feed. So I'm also going to incorporate things like trees, and I'm thinking about like where he came from, his village and stuff like this. So I know that he was more of in a foresty area, where Princess Mononoke is actually more in that kind of rivers and the rocks and stuff like that, even though there's obviously, of course, trees and forests there as well too. But I'm thinking about just for the visual standpoint, things that were iconic to the characters in the movie. How do you deal with heartburn? Yeah, I don't know if I've ever had heartburn, so I can't recommend anything. I'm not a doctor. Any book references for learning color theory? Actually, no. Unfortunately, I don't know of any books off the top of my head that kind of goes into that. There are many books on color, of course. Well, actually, you know what? I would recommend the James Gurney book on color and light. James Gurney, the guy who did Dinotopia, has an awesome book on that. I don't have a copy of it, but I do know that it exists. And I think that one will be a good one for that particular subject matter. I did take color theory classes at Art Center, but I don't remember actually having a book for that. I think it was like a handouts and stuff that the instructor put together for themselves, but not like a textbook. What was my biggest self-criticism starting out in the beginning? I mean, it's the obvious one. Why am I not as good as my friends, right? Because I had a lot of friends at Art Center who could just design and paint digitally and analog. It's like so incredibly well. It's like, man, why can't I do what they can do? I don't have the same level of like achievement of quality. That's how you think of it in the moment. Like you only see the things that don't work in your stuff, and you only see the things that seem to be good in their stuff. But of course you ask them that and they're like, what are you talking about? Like my work is this and this and this also, So as a self-criticism, of course we're very harsh on our own growth and developments and very kind of lenient to our friends maybe to a degree, because you see things that what they do that you don't do, and because of that you think that you're lacking something, right? Seems again obvious. How do you overcome it? You recognize that everybody has strengths and weaknesses. You can't do everything, but you can find a focus and a passion in something, and once you not absorb but accept and embrace that part, then, like I said, you will start to grow potentially, tenfold, because now you're giving yourself all to that one area. It's not to say that you can adapt it and apply to other things, but I'm talking about a skill set, right? So for me, I knew very early on that I was not a painter. I like to paint, and I have painted a lot, but I know that that's not necessarily the thing I first turned to. That's not the thing in how I see the world. With painting, artists are chasing light, and light generates then the use of color afterwards, right? Value is the most important aspect. For me, it was all about line and shape. The way JF is asking, a struggle with anime and manga proportions, specifically with the head and specifically with the placement of the eyes. Could you give us some ideas on that? Well, if you're struggling with the anime and manga proportions, I mean, yeah, of course, first thing is first, you should actually learn real proportions of the human head. How is it broken down, right? What are the general landmarks? Looking at the bone structure, the skull. And then from there, if I look at the stylized iterations of it, what are they really pushing of scale, placement? In manga and anime, it's pretty obvious, right? Things like the scale of the eyes are much larger. The placement tends to be a bit wider to a degree. Everything else is shrunken down quite more. You see this mainly because they're in the early forms of manga and anime, it's because they're trying to make the characters look a lot more cute. You want them to look more like babies. And so in the old formats of animes and mangas, they were looking at things like Betty Boop. So the 20s and 30s of the American cartoons pushed this a lot. The Japanese animes and mangas were also seeing this as well. During times like World War II and whatnot, you have characters from the Looney Tunes and Disney, and Betty Boop was one of them, being shown throughout international kind of stuff. So of course the Japanese and manga are going to see them as well. But that's not the only place of inspiration, because natively within Japan, as they have their own artists generating their own content, of course they're going to start to find their own culture, their history, the storylines, and they put together their own back history of like woodblock art and calligraphy and whatnot into it. So in that kind of environment is where you can, only there would you have anime and manga come into fruition at that point. I mean, even the word of manga, where that comes from, if you don't know, it's the artist who put together the Great Wave of Kanagawa, right? Hokusai. If you don't know who Hokusai is, the most reprinted piece of art probably in the world, the Great Wave. If you don't know this, and I talk about it in the classes, but Hokusai, does coin the term of manga, but he used to generate small little pamphlets and booklets that he would sell. This is before he did the big wave on how to draw. So he used to have instructional booklets on sketching and drawing observationally. I discovered this stuff like 5 years ago, that he used to do this. Everybody knows Hokusai is, right? And Hokusai is an amazing, woodblock print artist. But the thing is, he used to actually do a lot of shape building and drawing and techniques of steps, and they're directly correlated to things he would see, and he would sell them to make money essentially. It's pretty amazing, because the stuff that I teach is pretty much the thoughts and how he approaches sketching as well. He obviously implements it towards his woodblock work, but those pieces, you can find them in like museum examples, and it's all online. Hokusai sketches. You see pages of this stuff. It's really incredible. But the word of manga comes from there. The small little booklets and how he instructs to teach drawing and painting, or not painting, but drawing. I've been having a hard time drawing clothes for street high fashion. Do you have any tips? Well, first and foremost, I'm sure you are looking at street and high fashion, right? But from there, I think it's all about then the breakdown of the shapes of that fashion. Shape language, something we mentioned and talked about earlier. It's not so much on technique per se, but it's more about how do I represent that article of clothing or that style in a way where it actually captures the energy per se, right? Even if you're slightly stylizing it, maybe looking at some fashion art can be great too. I think that's a part of it. But yeah, learning some fundamentals about how to actually generate and create and draw things like fabric itself can be a great place to begin as well. So let's see what the question above, kind of not really materials. The question from XPTT is, I can't quite work out how to draw fur on animals. Any tips on how to draw them? Well, just like right over here with this animal in the front, I don't have this like indication of hair everywhere, because they're on different parts of the animal. There are short hairs and longer hairs, right? So on the short hair of the animal, I'm not really going to draw every single one of those things. The biggest issue, I could just break it down to this when it comes to fur. You can either draw the fur as line, hatching, or line as shape. I use line as shape. Hatching comes afterwards. But people start to go in there with, let's say, I have a piece of paper. let's say I draw a sphere. Let's say it's covered in hair. This is how they draw hair, right? Or a person with a face. This is the long person's hair, and this is the hair on top of their head. This is the mindset when it comes to first drawing, that you think of the strands of the hair that are there. And so you draw the strands of hair, obviously. But you have to think about how I actually would generate it as a shape. Find the person's face, how the hair is actually a silhouette. And I can place in hatching interior-wise for shadow shapes, movement of the fine hairs in there, if anything else. But again, it's about the shape grouping, which is what you can instantly recognize in the drawing, because silhouette is the first read. So I'm going to kind of skip down a little bit to the feed. I apologize if I'm skipping questions. So if you do want to ask again, please, you can do so. Miguel asks about, again, Terada's work. What do you think makes Terada's work his work? Well, a lot of it is based on sometimes the actual, the subject matter, right? Things that he's interested in is a part of it. Based on his ideas and concepts, then of course the technique kind of backs it up. But if we're talking about technique, a lot of it I think is based on things of how he controls proportion. Is very much Terada's work. Because I don't think there's any other artists out there that kind of proportions characters like he does. There's going to be a string over here coming out that direction. Just subtle suggestion of it. I'm going to bring in some like vegetation, trees back over here, giving a foresty kind of look to it. There'd be some like branches. Just turning off on one end, kind of throwing in some negative and positive shapes. This idea of nature. Especially the movie, the Princess Mononoke. It's one of my favorites from Ghibli. It's not my top number one. My first favorite Ghibli film is actually Porca Rosso. I really like that one a lot. It's a bit of a mature storytelling where it's not really for kids per se. I mean, obviously there's a lot of comedy factor into it, but it's, you know, such an adult theme in terms of like the, you know, whole warfare from like, you know, World War I and whatnot, and all that kind of stuff, trauma and all that kind of relationships. The second would be Mononoke. I really like this film as a second for me. Third wouldn't be a Ghibli Miyazaki film. It would be Ghibli, but from a different director. I really like Pompoko. That's the one with the raccoons, the tanukis. I really like that one as well. I really enjoy the ones that always play upon nature, of course, and versus man, which is a big aspect of what Ghibli does. But then, of course, you know, more of mature themes of character development, transitions, and whatnot as they grow and change as people. And yeah, those kind of themes I find very entertaining. Fipamoti is asking, I'm a painter who is used to working in blocks of paint and using colors and value for detail. However, I am trying to switch to a style like mine, using line and shapes, but it's quite different and difficult. Do you have any advice? Well, the painting and the drawing do go hand in hand, okay? So I think what I would recommend maybe is more of how the process kind of works. Like, what do you start with and what do you end up with? But at the end of the day, you have to think about, well, what is it you're trying to create? Is it more of a drawing or is it more of a painting? Like, you could say like you like the style, what I'm trying to go for, but if you're talking about line and shape, it's more of a method of approach towards building something. That's not really a style, it's a technique. Style and technique are two different things. Style is more attached to things like mediums and stories and all that kind of stuff, where line and shape is more about how we build stuff, right? Construction. But if I use technique of line and shape for painting, it's the underlay, right? The underlay drawing and how we line stuff and structure things and apply paint on top of that. Right now you're saying I do go straight into the painting first, blocking out paint, colors, apply value details and all that kind of stuff. Which is how, you know, many painters will paint. They don't necessarily always draw something. They have, you know, big blocks of things and they start to render stuff based on light and value. But in drawing, you're essentially thinking about composition, structure, proportion, volume. With the drawing, the color and the painting go on top of those areas because you know where they're going to be located, and you can then increase the level of volume and also details through, you know, the rendering aspect to it. But if you're trying to go for something more based on style, I mean, this style is not necessarily my style. It's a combination of something that might be of mine, but also representing of something what Ghibli would do. Um, so it's a little bit of a blend right here. But if you're saying I like maybe the simplistic nature of it, stylization, or from the more cartoonier or animated feel to things, then yeah, that's a little bit different. Whether you draw or paint it, you would just match up to the shapes that are there that associate to the character's design. And this is where then you would want to look at many inspirations from things that you can look at and you enjoy and you find that taste to, right? Let's see. Question here is I want to ask, how do you represent light and shadow using a pen in ways it doesn't look like a total mess? You'll see what I'm doing here in the trees. I'm graphically separating shadow shapes, right? Form shadows, cast shadows, and light areas. Simple two graphics, light to dark. And as I then separate them, I'm able to place in things like hatching or fills, even the watercolor. So I'm not going to fill these in with hatching right now because this is my focal area. If I push this just as dark, it's a lot of competition. So I'm going to keep this very open and let the watercolor do the work. So it's based on shape, shadow shapes. Question here from New Old Generation is, can you tell me about my courses and its benefits and when should I take it if I'm just starting art? And you just got the book. So I appreciate your support. Thank you for getting the book. And also thank you if you had to wait for a while to get it, especially in terms of time of actual travel for shipping. But in terms of the first question, the benefits, right? What is it and what are the benefits? Well, the course that I teach called Dynamic Sketching stems from a course that I took at Art Center. That was taught by my instructor and mentor, Norm Sherman. And basically what he had done was bridge together and stitch in multiple different disciplines of drawing and draftsmanship. So whether it comes from architecture, product design, illustration, transportation, it comes from all these different disciplines of thinking of drawing. From there, as he brought in the best of all those worlds, it's a form of how to basically build a stronger visual library, a deeper sense of what you can look at, observe, break it down, draw effectively, but also retain. So you can then use it for later on for things like storytelling, design. It's a fundamental of drawing and sketching, but it's not like the base first step. Like the first step could be like my first observations of still life. Basic perspective, right? Basic figure drawing. Like start there, and from there, dynamic sketching come in afterwards. In terms of placement of when a student like at Art Center would take a class like dynamic sketching, it will be in their second year. So the first year is all in those fundamentals. Second year, they would take dynamic sketching, right? And dynamic sketching wasn't a mandatory, it was an elective class, so people can take it based on interest. I want to learn how to draw more. They can take that course. So that's the benefit then, of course, as well. It builds a massive amount of confidence. If I know how to draw almost anything, well, there's nothing really holding me back on how to study stuff, right? But people here are going to be able to say, like, I really like drawing the figure, but I don't know how to draw a car. They're so different to me. But to me, I don't see them as so different things. If I can train you to see how you build through shape and form for one thing, I can train you to see it in another way, or to another subject in the same way. So it's training your eyes and your mind, not so much on just the hand on how to draw something. That's a part of it. It's a given, of course. Line, exercises, shapes, forms, visually, it's a part of the drawing. But just by naturally drawing every single day, you can get good, you know? But you can only get so good. And if you're able to train your mind on how to problem solve, things that you see or encounter that you've never drawn before, then you can adapt. And adaptation is survival, especially in this industry. Now let's see. Sarah's saying his favorite Ghibli film was The Wind Rises. I like that one a lot too, actually. It was great. Mainly because that airplane that stems from it, the A6M50 airplane from World War II, that was used during the Pearl Harbor attacks and most of the time at the time of World War II in the campaigns of the Pacific and whatnot. It's a beautiful airplane. And there's a plane of that one example at the Planes of Fame Air Museum out in Chino, California, which is the museum I go to all the time. And they have an example of that Zero there. Caught on the ground in Saigon in 1940s, brought over to the U.S. and studied. Broken apart, kept in storage, and Chino found it, and they what's that called? Restored it to flying condition. And it actually has still the original Sakai engine inside that thing. It's one of two examples in the world where that airplane still has most of its original parts. because there's a lot of examples of zeros of airplanes out there, but most of them were wrecked or used in things like suicide bombings and stuff like that, or crashes. So they don't really exist as much in parts and pieces to things. But as a full airplane that still has its original engine, super rare. So to see that up close in person is incredible. And also knowing more about the history, about the person. And again, it's an anime, it's a cartoon, and they've taken some liberties as to what they've done. But the guy, obviously was more passionate about aviation, not about warfare. But how they took his design and made it, be a warplane essentially. There's a lot of back and forth that can come up, obviously based on discussion when it comes to that part. But that's why that makes the movie very interesting. That question of, here is someone who loves aviation and designing airplanes, but now he's generating and creating something that's going to be used for killing people. Brace Him has an interesting question here, which is, any advice for a recent grad who is struggling with getting a job in animation, viz dev specifically? Advice for motivation and discouragement. It's tough, okay? As simple as this. There is no easy answer, and nor do I have an answer for that. Is there an advice as well too? Well, of course, anybody can give advice. Be encouraged by saying, "Oh, keep going, be patient, you'll get there eventually." And that's something I could easily say as well too. It's like, well, give it time, be patient, and maybe something will come your way. But I'll also be upfront, and I won't bullshit people. I will be honest. And the thing about this is that right now, it's very hard to get work for your level. There's a lot of work out there, but for someone who's just beginning out of graduation of school, it can be a little bit tough. The reason why is because it's not based on your fault of anything that you have done. Okay, it's just the wrong moment of timing, and nobody can plan for something like a pandemic, or there's a virus going all the way through and just ruining industries and whatnot, food industry to the movie industry to whatnot, whatever industries they're focusing on. But the animation industry, entertainment, actually has done okay, because they've been gone to more to streaming, to TV, not so much on theater anymore. So places like Disney and places like DreamWorks have actually come out on top. They already kind of were on top, but even more so, But here's the issue then. Well, okay, everyone's on pandemic and nobody's working in the office anymore. Well, where are they working? At home. So our studios are going to be willing to risk and hire someone who's just out of school to work at home for full production. You could probably imagine that they wouldn't. Why? Why wouldn't they? Because you have no experience on how to actually run a production, or at least be a part of a production. In a studio, you could be working with the producer, the art director, other artists. You start to learn the ropes. They can train you a bit too. But when you're at home, you're responsible for your hours, how you work, your environment, what you produce, being on time, understanding the programs of things like FTPs and how your hourly rates, and contacting people ahead of time. You got to be responsible. So who are they hiring now? More experienced people. Look at any job listing. We're looking for senior level people of hiring. That's a general trend at the moment, right? Now, I'm not going to say it's impossible for someone who's a student to looking for work to get out there and find something. If your skill is strong enough, you're able to actually, interview and contact or find even an in. This is where the networking becomes really huge. It's then possible to be able to engage with the people via dialogue and sell them by saying, I'm ready, I'm competent, I'm responsible, I've trained, and I'm going to be good enough for you to hire me on to be successful in what you guys are producing. I'm passionate about the stuff I want to do, and I want to be a part of your company, right? But this is where then it takes your constant hustle on to generate new content, to catch the eyes of other people, to build a strong network, whether it's through social media or through other friends and coworkers you may have had in the past, and finding ways of webbing all that stuff together. You can't sit and wait for something to happen. Again, that's also very obvious, as many things I've said before. But at the same time, you also understand that there are some things about luck and timing. But the only way for luck and timing to actually happen is that you got to be very proactive on that engagement and connection. So what you should be doing right now, of course, is keep looking, keep generating new stuff. If you're out of school at the moment, let's say you've been out of a school for 3 months, and if you haven't generated new work, then you're already behind. You got to keep making more stuff. The idea is to constantly replace the work in the portfolio, always. If there's anything in your portfolio that starts to get old, you got to find a way to replace it. You can't just sit and wait for that to get better, right? So then from there, actively contacting people, hounding them, and don't feel a little bit hesitant, being I don't want to bother, what's going on. Keep hounding them as much as possible. If they say no, then it's no. But they say, not right now, the timing is not good. We're not looking for anybody at the moment. Well then, I don't know, a couple months from then, do it again, you know. But have a whole lineup of different things you're looking at. But then also be open to take work that is not exactly what you want to do. Because what I would tell you, what I would have told you, Brand Sam, if you were in my classes, is that as you were graduating, you should expect to understand that what you wanted to do to find a job in animation more than likely was not going to happen anyways, whether it was a pandemic or not. Because 80% of people that were going to graduate, let's say from a graduating class, let's say there were like 100 people, 80% of them are not going to get the first job they want. It's just the way it is. I didn't get my first job that what I wanted, you know? So the question is, if I don't get the work that I want, how do I get work then? Well, you got to get work on things that maybe that's not necessarily what you were trained for, you know? Or things that you felt like weren't necessarily of your interest. I don't know what else is out there. Well, what kind of skills do you have? Well, I can draw, I can paint, I can compose. I have some examples. But then, of course, you know, knowing people really helps that. I know it sounds kind of hard to hear. It's like, well, I wanted to work in animation. You can. Maybe not right now, but you can. You know? The idea is the ultimate goal. It may not happen at the moment, short term. Roadblocks are there, stepping stones. Keep moving from there, find different angles, back doors, if you can, right? But you got to know more people, and you have to keep generating more work. Well, what if I worked in things like, I don't know, what else is there? Advertising is really big right now, illustration work, maybe even generating my own content. Tutorials, like, well, I'm not a teacher. It's like, well, why can't you just share your thoughts, right? I'm not saying you have to put yourself out there by saying, I know everything, and this is how you should be doing stuff. Of course not. You share. As you share, there are other people that are with you next to you who are going through the same thing, and you then generate a community. If somebody may know something, they know your work, and they might show your stuff to them, thinking that, you know what, this is a project that you're working on, you might want to look at this person. It's right up in the kind of the same parallel. But you can't plan for that. But the only thing you can do is be proactive on constantly generating new work that might align with something at some point. But be open to then say an opportunity that might come your way, potentially by chance, and saying, yes, I will do that. Or not, no, it's because it's not what I want to do. Right? The idea is to get the ball rolling. But you can't come out on top right outside of graduation. It's not going to happen. There are some people that will, but you're looking at a small percentage of people that are doing this. And everyone else around them are looking at them saying, I want to do what they're doing. The handful of people that actually got to the jobs of like Disney or DreamWorks or all these Marvel Studios or whatever the case is. But yeah, that's just an advice. Is that motivational? Is it more of discouragement? I hope not. You know, the idea is you got to build a skin. You got to get hardy at this point. You got to be more hungry than the person next to you. You know, but share, be cordial, be respectful. You're not trying to squash people. You're not trying to step on others. If you find something that is a great opportunity, but that maybe it really isn't for you, well, maybe you know somebody. Help them out, right? You think, but I gotta focus on what I gotta do. But you know what? You might be in a position where you can then elevate someone below you. If they can be helped, they might come back and try and help you. Interesting question about education again. Do you have any advice for people who are in college taking a course not related to art but want to pursue art as a professional career? I mean, you're talking about a transition of a profession, okay? So if you said, I just want to draw for a hobby, well, then you just take it because you just find it fun. But if you're saying, I'm taking a course that's not related to art, but I want to do, you know, art as a professional career, then why are you in this course in the first place? That's not related to art. If you are truly interested in actually having a career in professional art, you should be in it right now. So you might be thinking, well, you know, it's like I don't necessarily have the chops, or, you know, I didn't really start that way. Well, then change it right now. You can't wait 5 years, like, oh, I got to finish this education first. Okay, you can if you want to, but if that's not really what you want to do, then you're spending money and time in an area that's not going to necessarily put you in the career path, right? That skill set might still be useful. It could be great experience, but you might as well just switch it over, that energy and interest, into the professional career that you want to do. If you're thinking, well, it's a risk though, I don't know if I'll make it in that career. Well, of course not. Even in the career that you're focusing on now, there's no guarantee that you'll make it. So jump. Don't even worry about, like, you know, any I guess concerns of, like, I don't about the logistics, about the money, that kind of stuff. Well, if you're already in college and taking courses not related to art, but you want to pursue art, is it something that's maybe based on more family? Maybe like parents are like, no, don't do that, do this. Or it could be even personal by thinking that, I see it going around me, but I just initially started in this, course that's not related to art, but now I see it. This is why I'm saying change it right now. If you know that you feel that there's something you really want to do, but how you know is based on then conversation with others, to get a sense of what's actually out there, what the educational programs bring, what is the industry that you want to work in. If you say, I want to do a professional career in art, well, what does that mean? What kind of career? What kind of positions? Do you know what's out there? I'm not saying you have to make a choice, but have you researched it or thought about it, Can you see yourself doing this every single day is a question, too. We're going to jump to the watercolor here very soon. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you start to see the image. On Instagram, you kind of see it like that, so you see it better framed. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, so I apologize if I missed a couple of them here. So I recently started drawing, and as of right now, I'm only drawing from references. This is from Kachal. Should I keep drawing from references, or should I learn anatomy? Both. Start with whatever interests you. If you are studying from references, keep doing that. And then also move into things like anatomy while you also study from references. Because if you just like to draw and draw things like figures, there's never a late moment or too early of a moment to be introduced to the idea of how to approach drawing anatomy, right? New old generations asking about books. Well, for people that are beginning, again, looking for things like basic figurative drawing books or perspective books would be great. Keep asking people that are in here also. Maybe somebody can reply to that. One book I will always recommend would be like the Framed Ink book from Marco, which is great. The Framed Ink is more about composition and basic perspectives and such. But there's so many out there of like book formats. Honestly, even my book, right? I'm not here to try to sell you my books at all, okay? But I'm just saying there are options in terms of like, very many types of books that are out there. The best thing to do is explore. There's no one book that will give you all the answers, right? But for a beginner who's just starting, yeah, I think just the basics of perspective, but it might be too technical. I think taking classes on that might be a better idea, honestly. From there, I think just in the beginning it could be more based on, I don't know, things like, not perspective, but still life drawing or even figurative drawing to a degree. Because perspective takes so much process and layer, and someone explaining that to you might be better. Where things like anatomy or human is more based on visual, so you look at it and you just kind of transfer it over. The experience of that, of course, is still difficult, but I think it's a bit more approachable because it doesn't feel like math, when it comes to like perspective. It's just more of a visual thing. It's like I see the figure, I know what that part is, I can look at it and I can copy it, It's a good way just to begin to kind of know the tools. You just want to become familiar to the tools you're drawing with, essentially. Okay, I want to switch over to the watercolor right now because I think I've done pretty much as much as I need to. I'm looking at the camera as well because right now I'm looking at it kind of close, and I want to give it a bit of a distance. This is okay, but I'm looking at it also on my monitor to see what it feels like. I'm kind of looking at it from a distance. It's okay, it's good. I think some of the silhouette around here could be pushed a bit more, so I'm going to actually push my line weight a little bit harder. That's the one last thing I'll do. Question over here from Murloc is, you're hoping this question isn't insensitive, which we'll see. But can you separate your art from your corporate career? Is it impossible? Is it an impossible or utopian task, as getting the most eyes on your stuff involves capital and an audience, along with the day-to-day sustenance for decades of practice? So the basic question again is it possible, but can you separate your art from your corporate career? And that's a question if you're, let's say, doing two different things, right? Because you could be in, let's say, an office job in a corporate field and doing your own art. And that art may not be a career. It might be more of a hobby. So, of course, people can definitely separate those two things, right? You go to your day-to-day job, 9 to 5. You go home, you might be creative. Photography, sculpture, drawing, painting, things you like, observational or referencing. But it's based on the fact that you have an interest towards it as a hobby or a passion, and you're able to pursue that. Now, if you're saying, is there a way to potentially separate my personal art to my corporate career in art? So let's say I work at a studio that develops games or animations or comics or illustrations, whatever the case is, but I'm working for a company, all right? And they hired me to come in there to generate the content for them. They own that content, but I'm an artist in the field. And then of course I'm trying to also create art of my own. Now either way, when you're on office time, that's office time. You're working on stuff for them and them only. So you can't bring in personal work for the time that you're actually there, right? That's a big no-no. But if you're done with that and you go home, you might think, okay, I'm going to generate my own stuff. So is there a way to separate those two things? Of course, because you make the time for it. You make the time for the things you want to generate because it creates and feeds into your creative juices. When you go into an office, it might be a bit draining. I'm trying to generate content and ideas for this other person, this company, and it's not that maybe interesting to you, but it's a job for you maybe, right? I hope it doesn't feel like that, but it can be, because it has in the past for me to a degree. You go into a studio, you work on a fun project, but still, it's not something that you're really that super into, but you do it because it's still applying the skills that I have, and it's a great job, 9 to 5. But I go home, but I still really want to kind of push my own stuff a lot. And this is what I did. So back in 2000 and... So in terms of career, I worked in the entertainment industry for video games for about 7 years. From 2005 to about 2013, I worked full-time jobs in the house of a studio. And I jumped from studio to studio quite a bit. And in those times, I would work in the office. So I'd be there at 10 a.m. and I don't go home until about 6 or 7 p.m., right? So then after hours, I would then do my thing. I'll go work out maybe and then go home. Now, in the past, when I first started working, I would just go home and just whatever, nothing. I would just watch TV or watch a movie, relax a little bit, and then go to bed. Next morning, go back to work, right? That kind of thing. So I'm going to go back into this here. Later on, it's all based then on opportunity. Opportunity, I think, is a key way on being able to separate those two things in a manner where you can keep it consistent. So how do I generate those opportunities? Well, that's where things like networking, knowing somebody can be a big part of it. That's how it started for me. I was working in San Diego at the time, a full-time job, and I worked at a company called Bottle Rocket Studios. We were making a video game, and I was the concept artist there. I was hired in February of 2008. And when I went there, of course, I started working on a bunch of different things. We were working on a game called Splatterhouse. It was a remake of an old game. And my office mate, his name is Dave Wilkins. Okay, he was an artist over at Marvel also. Did a lot of stuff for covers and comics. But he was also the lead concept artist at that studio. Now, I was only there for about 10 months, but maybe a little bit less than a full year, because the company went through and ended up losing the actual property. They weren't managing it very well. So I got laid off at the end of that year. And then I jumped over to another studio. But either way, Dave, at that summertime, we became, friends, and he said, hey, Comic-Con in San Diego is happening. Do you want to join me? I have a free table at Artist Alley. Do you want it? So there was an opportunity. I didn't ask for it. I've been to Comic-Con. It's like, hey, that's a cool idea. I've never done that before. So I said, I'll give it a try. So he gave me the table because he had connections and people over at San Diego Comic-Con. So he gave me the opportunity to actually go out there and generate my own stuff. That means now I have to go home and actually begin to create something, Well, what do I have to make? So my first Comic-Con, I made a mini sketchbook, 2008. And it was fun, but man, I learned a lot. It's like how much time it takes to make a book, and it was a small little crappy sketchbook. I actually have copies of it over there on my shelf. I still have it. Actually, you know what? Let me grab it for you. If you want to see it, I'll bring it. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Give me 1 second, you guys. Okay, so here's a copy of this book that I have. I just grabbed a couple of them. So here's the book. I made this in 2008. And this is a mini sketchbook I put together for Comic-Con in San Diego. Never had done expos, never done Comic-Con, never did a show of any type. I worked 9 to 5, went to work at Bottle Rocket, did my time there, worked on characters and environments and creatures and all that kind of stuff. And so in the summer of July, Dave said, hey, here's a table. And this is like maybe a couple months before the actual show was due. So I had to go home and start putting together things. I thought about, well, what do they do normally at Comic-Cons? I've been there before. I thought, well, I'm going to make a mini sketchbook. That's what they sell normally, Because at that time, I had no properties. I had no stories. I did nothing. Nothing. I wasn't teaching. I just had a single job, It was 2008. I had been out of school for 3 years at that point. 4 years. 4 years. I'm sorry, 4 years. So I put together this book. I put this book together about a month before the show. Okay, I waited to the very last minute. right before the show. This is a stapled book, which I had hand stapled myself. All right. This is printed on the brown tone paper that I used to draw on for my dynamic sketching classes. So I just folded some of these papers in half and I just stapled them. Okay. And here are the pages inside of it. These are just drawings I just put together. Some of them were new, some were digital. This is all black and white. It's not even color. Because I took the content, I put the book together in Photoshop, and I took it to Kinko's. All right. This is a local printer place. I'm sure some of you guys know of it. FedEx, Kinko's kind of thing. And I photocopied these books myself. And I must have printed maybe 70 copies. Photocopies, not real print copies, photocopies. And it's such a crappy little sketchbook, you know. People might think, oh, that sounds pretty cool, but in the moment, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So I'm just putting together sketches of old work and some new work, and it's like, oh, I'm going to grab that piece over there, that piece over there. And I printed it, stapled it myself. I trimmed all the edges myself too, because they were all off a little bit. Again, they're kind of like scrappy here and there. They're even like different colors. Like some of the book paper was different colors, so you can see like one's a bit lighter, one's a bit darker. They're all inconsistent. So this is in 2008, and I was how old? I graduated in 2004. I was 23 at the time. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So I was about maybe 27, 28 years old at the time. Yeah, it was around that age. So I wasn't like young or anything. So I take the book to Comic-Con in 2008, and I'm sitting there at the table, you know. And I never produced something like this before. Again, now I'm separating my corporate field into my personal art. And so I go there and I sit at the table and I'm selling these things. I have a pile of it on my right. I'm sorry, my left. And on my right hand side, I had all my original sketches and drawings. In the middle was a blank sheet of paper I was just drawing on at Comic-Con, my very first show. And for 5 days, the show goes on, Wednesday to Sunday. Wednesday is a preview day at Comic-Con in San Diego. And by the way, Comic-Con, I just read the news, was canceled and pushed the next year in 2022. I was supposed to go hopefully this year again, but they canceled it. Anyways, so I was there drawing. I didn't know how to really talk to people. I didn't start teaching. At that point in my life, in my mid-20s to late 20s, I was still a little bit reserved. I didn't really like talking to people that much, but I thought, you know, this is still fun. I want to just try it, because why not? It's like right in my backyard. I live in San Diego. So I took it upon myself to do it. That was a piece that I did digital. And as I went to the show, 5 days went about, and people would come up to my table, and they would pick up this book and look through it and say, oh, it's kind of cool, and they put it down. And they went to my right, and they saw these pile of drawings and sketchbooks there. And there were these original sketches of these characters I just created randomly. And there were a cat and a mouse, a cat and a rat combo, okay? And they picked those up, and they were like, can we buy these? I was like, no, they're originals. You know, I'm just showing them to you. You can take a look at them. My portfolio's right there. Please take a look. For 5 days straight, this was happening. People would come up to the table, pick up the book, like, oh, that's kind of cool. And they put it down, and they went to my right, and they looked at those drawings, like, oh, can we buy this? And I had to tell them, no, that's not for sale. It's just display. You can look at the book. And for the entirety of the show, I think I sold maybe 5. $10 a pop. I printed 60 or 70 of them, okay? I think I sold about 5 for the entire show. Now here's the thing, there was nothing really out of my pocket, because Comic-Con Artist Alley tables are free still. You have to apply to get it. You have to be chosen to be a part of Artist Alley there. So there was really nothing I'm like losing in terms of money though, you know. It's like some of these were, again, didn't cost me anything, because I went to Kinko's and photocopied them. But it was more in the sense of like, nobody wanted it. And I was like, okay. But I learned. Next year, 2009, I went back to Comic-Con. I remembered the response. Well, okay, that wasn't really the interest, because it was just so random, sporadic, just stuff in there, you know. But they liked that stuff over here. These drawings of piles of these cat and a rat character. And I took those characters and I started thinking about, well, what are they? I just drew them for fun. They're just drawing on brown paper. So I took those sketches initially and put them in another sketchbook like this one. Went to a local printer, had them do it. I didn't print them myself at that point. Took some of those characters, drew more of them digitally. Took it to Comic-Con. And what's interesting about places like Comic-Con and Expos is that people come back, right? And so they say, oh, I remember you, I think, but I remember that work, that drawing, I remember that from last year. So they picked up that book and said, can we buy this one? It's cool. You know, this is what I saw last time. So I sold more of those books, you know? So I learned about what people were attracted to. I recognized the things that people were seeing from my stuff and content. It wasn't about coming back and doing another one of these. It was about responding to the things that people were gravitating towards, taking that, capitalizing on it, producing more of it. Oh, here we go. Next year, this is the book that you're looking for. Next year, I brought those characters back again. I did it for 4 years straight on those characters. I made a comic with a story. I even talked to producers at that later on, a couple years later. Hey, we should make this a TV show. I talked to producers trying to pitch it. Didn't happen, but it was exciting because I was learning as I went along. That was my beginnings of doing stuff like this. This is about 2 years before I started teaching. Okay, so I was only working full time, and I wasn't generating my own stuff. So 2 years after I started teaching more, then I was doing more Comic-Con. I've done Comic-Con since 2008, every single year. Yeah, people who are cat ladies, like cats and rats, because the people that were buying my books were cat ladies. That's fine. I'll sell you my stuff. Sorry, I missed a bunch of questions, so I know I was just talking about that kind of stuff. Anyways, here's one little thing, okay? The thing I just told you right now on that story on how I started Comic-Con and stuff like this, I usually have that as a part of my lecturing classes, okay? And do understand that the actual thing I just mentioned to you and how I told you that story is directly associated to how I treat my social media. You can think about that a little bit. Sorry, just wanted to get back into the drawing just a tiny bit amount. I wanted to push my line weight around this again. We're still going to be getting into the watercolor here in a minute. We've been about 1 hour and 40, so we're still good on time. I'm going to come back to the questions here real soon. Let me just establish some of these lines real quickly. Okay, so let's go into the watercolor. I might bring in this pen in a minute because I do like the lines on that one. I'm going to be using my Schmink watercolor set here, this one. Nice and clean right now, thankfully. It's not a mess. I'll put this off to the right. And I also have my water brushes, and I also have a small little paper towel that I'll be using to wipe the water brush on. Different sizes right now. I have a medium sable, which is half full of water. It's not stained at the moment, so I'll be using this one. We also have one that's a thin brush, I think. This one's also a medium-sized brush. Usually keep 2 of those, so I can apply different kinds of colors on them. And then I also have a thin one, which I'll be using too. Mostly sable round brushes. I have a couple of flat brushes as well. This one over here. These are flat brushes. This is from a company called Bosner that's based out in Austria. I bought them because I was in Austria, so it doesn't matter what brand you buy. Pentel makes these, Kuretake makes these, but they're all standard. Whoa. Oh, cracked. That's useful, so let's throw that one away. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to take this and do some general washes. When it comes to watercolor, I think about, well, with this one, I'm not going to go fancy. I'm not going to be like, well, what's my temperature, color, and lighting? I'm actually going to be doing mostly just local color based on the character's costume and the general background. So normally I can do things like a general wash, a temperature of things like a burnt sienna or burnt umber, or more like a cool, like ultramarine, and I start to layer more color on top of that. So that's if I want to tie all the colors together into a single temperature. All right. You can do things like layering of, what do they call that? In like oil painting and acrylic, we would do, it's not tinting, a different word. Damn it, again, it's one of those words that tip my tongue, but it might come to me later on. Let me just apply some water. So I get a little bit of pool of water in there. Glazing, thank you. That's what it is, glazing. So you can do that with watercolor as well. You can glaze a little bit of it because this is a transparent medium. So with being transparent, you can work in light washes and kind of build up to your saturations and also your values. I tend to do an even mid-tone value and then go to my darks first, but the darks are kind of established already in the line. So don't want to really push it more than what's already there. And then go to the light, but the light is already established from the background of the paper. So I do a mid-tone, but also think about where the highlights are based on the background of the paper coming through. Then I go to my dark sections and push my saturations more and more, okay? For this one, let's actually... let me see if one of these flat brushes are wide enough. Don't know if they are. This one actually has some water in it. Cool. This one's a bit whiter. Okay, so no stain. I'm smelling it because I'm seeing if the water is like I said, off in any way inside this thing. It's been sitting inside there for who knows how long. It hasn't evaporated, thankfully, which means it's watertight or airtight. So I'm going to use this to do a couple of initial underlays, okay? So I'm actually going to do that kind of temperature thing. I'm going to bring in, actually make this more of a warm to like the olives and the greens down over here. The cools will go into the actual costume and whatnot. So I'm going to be using this kind of like a lemon yellow, and we have like a sunset yellow over here. Because the Mononoke piece on the right will be more to the cools, because I'm thinking of her like being in the rivers and the waters and the boulders. That's going to be more cool. This will be more warm. Just simple composition, like complementaries of stuff like that, right? Cools and warms. It's not overly complex. It's not super original, but still, it's effective. Easy to also just apply. So in this, I want there to be a focal point on his area up here. So I'm going to go into the background at first, just kind of layer in some color. Being inside the border is what I'm going to do. I'm going to apply some water on top of this, directly on top, move it around. And I'm using the ink of the Pigma because it's water resistant. So it'll move around a little bit. It'll pick up some ink slightly. Now I haven't mounted this, okay? So in watercolor paintings, you'd want to mount this on a board with water tape, but we're not doing that right now. So this will buckle up, but it doesn't bother me. A little bit on the face here and there. We can lift a little bit if there's a bit more paint in areas that I want. I can wipe it off. Now the light is going to shine and reflect on this severely, so I do apologize. And what I'll do is kind of lift up the illustration a little bit like that, and so that we can see it better. But the problem is it's reflecting right into my eyes. But that's okay. I can see it well enough. I might even just like watch the monitor and paint this. Just doing quick washes. I'm not overthinking it. Just kind of warm that I want. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of throwing some strokes in there. Again, that white of the paper is coming through mostly right in there. Okay. So I'm gonna let this dry out a little bit. And what I do have next to me is also a heat gun, which I will use. So if there's a loud noise of air blasting through, I apologize, but that's what that is. I have it plugged in next to me, and what I use is something like this. This is the Wagner heat gun. I use it for a lot of modeling and stuff like that, but I use it also for like a watercolor stuff. So let it dry out. Now the idea, of course, is not to overheat this thing, because this heat gun goes very high temperature, so you could probably potentially burn your piece. You don't want to stay stationary. You want to move it around as much as you can. A hair dryer is more recommended. But I'm looking for an immediate effect, so having a super high temperature is something I'd rather use. So now that I have some wet areas, I'm going to kind of go over it slightly here and there. So now that I have this general underlay, now again, the camera is not exactly picking up one-to-one as to what I'm seeing to the monitor. So keep that in mind, all right? This is also why, again, like when you guys see work from social media, it's not exactly what the artist might have officially on their page. So it's always best to see the originals, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to work to the background area sections. Well, you know what? No, I'm going to go to the character because I think visually it'll look better. So I know he has like a blue tunic with like a red hood. I'll go to his skin. Let's just kind of get the tunic here first. So I'm going to get some of the colors of this blue. I'm looking for this distinct blue that I had, which is more like a phthalo. This one right here is pretty close. And this is the local color of the fabric that he has on. And right now there's a lot of water in this. I'm going to kind of dab it on the paper towel once in a while to get the excess water off. I want to fill enough with enough pigment, but it's still quite transparent. And I'll go in there and start to wash directly on top. Real light washes. And we'll be building this. Now, because of the transparency of the paint, that yellow that we had initially will tie all this stuff together, okay? Exactly, Goro. So you can't necessarily trust the social media posting or digital file or even a photograph of what you have in the piece, because it's not going to be true. This is the difficulty of printing as well, because a print will never really truly match up to the original at times. We can get close enough, but it's one of the hardest things to actually problem solve. So as I paint, it starts to dry out, you know, in sections. I'll kind of go back and rework things. I'm not trying to be overly tight in spots, okay? Notice it's not all fills. Some parts are just kind of brush strokes here and there. There are parts where the water just does its own thing, you know? So I'll bring in a bit more paint, let it sit, let it move around. The idea when it comes to watercolor is that you don't want to fight it. Let it move where it wants to. Question from Murloc is, do I ever work in oil paints? I have. Mixing pigments and painting is super satisfying. I actually find oil painting is actually a great entry into painting, okay? Because in actuality, oil painting is actually very forgiving. It's easy to move the medium around. You can easily wipe away things that don't work. It's fun to do. The only difficult thing about oil painting is the cleanup and the setup, you know? In terms of just painting itself, the hardest part is, of course, mixing your values, mixing your colors as well, you know? To either match up to what you're seeing or whatnot. But the medium is still a lot of fun to draw. I would not recommend acrylic as a beginning. Acrylic is really hard to do because the saturation you never really get. The value always dries lighter than what it is. No, I think, I'm sorry, darker. So it's really hard to control. It's always really chalky. The saturation never really come out the way you want to. Gouache is also another great medium, but a difficult one to control because of its value. It dries much lighter, I believe, in that one. Watercolor, in terms of one of the more important aspects to think about in the beginning, is not rushing it. Layer, slowly. I know I'm moving it relatively quickly, but because we're on a stream right now. So let's go into the hood section. So the color I just pulled off of the palette here is not the color I'm getting right here, because the underneath yellow kind of like, you know, tint at the moment is affecting the transparency of the blue. So this and this are not one-to-one. I'm sure you can easily see that by now. So the idea, of course, is to maybe even like test it on like side sheets of paper, whatnot. That could be really helpful. So here's the top portion of the hood. It's got that white patch of like cream in between the sections. I'm gonna lift this a little bit. I don't want that part to be there. I'm actually going to switch over to a different brush. I like using big flat brushes like this for the initial coverage, but in some parts I need to kind of control certain details or strokes. I could do so. In one of the painting classes I took at Art Center, it was a landscape painting class using gouache. And the instructor, who's his name is Mike Hernandez. If you guys want to have a great instructor in terms of landscape painting, Mike Hernandez is who you want to turn to. He's an artist over at DreamWorks, and he was my instructor at Art Center. Great guy, awesome instructor. But I took that course, and man, I struggled like hell. It was so hard to do because gouache was really hard to control for me. But he enforced limited tools. So in the beginning, we'd have to paint black and white and value structures, and we would only have flat brushes. So he'd only force us to draw in a 3x5, I think, size, and a 1-inch brush flat for everything. A 1-inch brush for the entire painting. It's so hard. But that was a great learning thing, you know. That's why I ended up liking the flat brush a lot. So limiting tool sets can be very good because it disciplines you about not overstepping into things you shouldn't be doing. For instance, what was the point of using a big flat brush? It refrained you from over detailing stuff. It was all about the big strokes and the value control. Okay, let me go into a little bit of skin. I'm going to mix that yellow that I had on this side with a bit of the red. I'm going to get some of the skin tones off of this part. Let's pull some water, move it around a little bit. Even if it bleeds into each other, it doesn't bother me. I want to let the watercolor do its thing. So here a little bit of light on the edges, and this will dry lighter than what it is. So you can also use things like paper towels, like this, to go in there and kind of dab and lift some parts and get some texture, or get some paint out if you don't want it. Drag code, this video will be saved on Twitch, and you can watch it again by then because I'll highlight the entire thing tonight. It'll be up there for its entirety, and on YouTube I'll repost this after a full week. Okay, so people who are subscribed can only have access to the videos, but into the future I always then repost. I now plan to do this. In the past I didn't do that. I only selected a few videos I reposted on YouTube, but now I want to repost all of them onto YouTube, but I give it that frame of time. So the benefit you have of subscribing is you have immediate access to the content. Question from Neo Generation again is, unfortunately I live right now in a city with no art class and no art shops. So I'm in the research phase right now. I can only buy the tools and the books online and take online courses, so that's why I'm asking, so I can start as soon as possible. Yeah, so classes online like mine are great to begin with. And so I would highly recommend those because it's a very low risk. Yeah, I mean, of course, money seems like, well, I don't have that much money. This is where you would just spend the time to build the funds, right? So this sleeve right here is a darker blue than this one, so I'm going to bring in a bit of the ultramarine and a darker tint like that one right there is a good, nice blue right there. Test it. It's probably going to be the same realm, so I'm going to actually go over this part quite a bit. So again, kind of finding strokes, letting paper kind of come through a little bit. I am going to go on top of this with some darker cast shadows and shadow areas once I establish all the local colors. The blue here to here is pretty similar at the moment, but it'll start to change more and more. I'm not overly concerned about that. His pants, I think, were like a beige or like a gray kind of pants, so I'm going to bring in a bit of this burnt sienna here. Actually, no, this is not a burnt sienna. This is different color, but it's okay. We can just use this to block it in here. Again, don't treat this like a coloring book, okay? The idea is not to like go in there by paint by numbers and trying to fill everything in exactly. I'm feeling the movement, letting some paper through. The benefit of this flat brush is because I can really move around it a lot. Let's go back to that skin tone color and bring it into the hands a little bit here, here, here. Let it paint move around, even if it mixes together, it's okay. Let it lift and move. His bow was like a reddish, but more orange. See if there's any questions. Are you squeezing the brush, Jenny? I always find it difficult to control the water flow. Yes, I am. So I definitely will squeeze it onto the palette. I don't really ever squeeze it too much onto the painting. Question here. Oh, this is for somebody. Oh, it's for me. Any tips to stay dedicated in using pens instead of pencils? I'm really starting to like now in my studies. If you already like it, then you're going to stick with it, right? But I think having an understanding of its long-term gain can also help you commit to it. What is the main, benefit long-term wise by using pen compared to pencil? The confidence in line economy, because you have to be very conscious of the lines you put down, because with pencil you can erase it. But the pen is permanent. So your first stroke is just as important as the last line you put down. So you have to be very consciously aware of what you're thinking of and trying to do with the drawing. That doesn't mean that drawing a pencil is a bad thing. It just means that they have different potential benefits and outcome. Why Ruser or User is asking, are my classes available to sign up for non-US folks? Absolutely. I wouldn't know why I would say it got rejected. Are you saying it was it didn't go through for payment? Because it most likely sold out is what happened. But anybody in the world can take it. But it just sells out instantly. So you have to give yourself kind of a good plan to just jump into the page when my registration begins to be able to actually get the actual class. I'm gonna go back into the sleeve here, kind of punch this a little bit. There's a lot of water that comes out of this particular brush, so that's why I'm kind of dabbing it a bit more to the paper towel. You see that crazy stroke like right in there, that water how it kind of moves around it. I really like that part. but I don't want to lose the drawing. This is about the drawing and less about painting. So I'm just going to establish as much as I can. His sash also like this dark color. Notice I don't use blacks and I don't use white paint. In painting, you actually should refrain from using directly black and white. It's not to say that you can't use them. It's just that it's a good training to try to find your values by mixing your darks and also getting to your lights. So to get my darks, usually I would mix ultramarine to burnt umber. And you can then control this temperature to be more cool by more ultramarine or more warm by burnt umber. Again, some people will definitely just go straight to black paints. You know, different kind of paints are out there. Even the white paints as well too. There's going to be like titanium white. There's going to be different kinds of levels of temperature within them. But in the beginning, I think it's good to also just learn how to mix your darks and lights. Do you use painting masks, liquid? I think those are great. I do sometimes, but not all the times, because it takes a moment to like dry out. But I think a lot of it is also because of my impatience. If anything else, it's also the mobility. I like to actually, you know, work on location somewhere, so I don't really use it for my on-site drawings. For pieces like this, I could for sure. I'm changing my brush by the way. Hold on. Let's go to the bigger one. I'm kind of done with the flat brush, so let's go back into the head. Let me zoom in a little bit. Hold on. There's one brush here. Okay, so this brush right now that I'm using, it will drip. Okay, so if I just hold it up here like this, the water will start to flow. Right now it's dripping. I'm not even squeezing it, but water's coming out. Now the reason why this is happening with this brush, you kind of have to know how these are built. You can see that there's water inside these handles. Some of you guys may have used this kind of tool before. Some of you may be new to it. But if you unscrew it, I'm going to put the painting away for just a second so I don't, ruin it. Let me just put it down here. If I unscrew this, okay, here's the actual reservoir that holds the water, all right? Let me put that off to the side also. And here's the actual brush compartment. Whenever you get these and you start to see that it starts to like fall apart or it's not really flowing very well, you can take it apart by this little black tab, press on it. This one may not come apart easily. The other Pentel ones do. This one may not. Yeah, it's kind of doing it, not really. So I haven't used this in a while, so it could be just stuck. Yeah, it doesn't want to come out. You would need a pair of pliers, but this part inside of it actually completely comes apart. Let me see if the other one does it. Some of them are more finicky and they're really tightly constructed. Other ones are a bit better. Let me see if this one comes apart. Oh, wait. I think this is the reason why. It's because the black tab on these ones are slightly different. Let me show you one that does do this. It's these brush pens. So this brush pen actually is built the same way, right? So it's got that brush on there. It's got the actual reservoir for the ink. Let me just kind of wipe it a little bit. With this one, you should be able to press it. No, this one's not going to come out right now either. I need a tool to be able to do that. But what I would normally do is push this in, and the inner compartment actually falls out. Okay? Let me see if I can just press it out here. Yeah, there it goes. So this part right here just fell out. Okay, my hand's gonna be covered in ink, but it's okay. And all this stuff comes out. So here's the actual brush itself with the little felt in there. This is the actual brush, the sable part. Okay, this brush goes inside here. You want to be careful of not breaking up the fibers too much. That fits inside there. This is a sponge right here, basically like a sponge that absorbs the ink. This part will go back into the pen, but this is the part you have to kind of pay attention to, right here on the back end. Inside here, there's a small little filter sitting right inside that part, okay? Sometimes I will remove it, so that way my flow of ink becomes even heavier, or water in some of these. But the filter is what can also get clogged up. So if you get pigment of ink or watercolor that kind of dries in there, it solidifies it. So then they become ruined. This one also just pops into the back in here. You can actually just put the actual refill part inside that part and just kind of comes back all together. But so if you have a problem with flow, you just have to clean that out. If you flush it with hot water, it'll all start to work better again. With these water brushes, they also have the same exact thing inside these things here. But this one I had removed it, which is why the flow of that water was really, really heavy. Right now, I don't want to use it. When would I use something like this? For large coverage of water, essentially, is what I would use it for, you know? So that's the only reason why that brush pen, you know, sorry if this is not interesting to anybody. When I use tools like this one here, I tend to have certain specifics about how I manipulate it or customize it. And for my brush pens, sometimes that's one thing I do. Let's go back to the extra watercolor piece now. Sorry if my hands are just a mess right now at the moment. Okay, let's go back into the head. This is now the other brush, which is not going to be, I just want to make sure. Yeah, we're good. So in terms of why I like switch pens or brush pens out there with the water brush is because of that. So I'm using the cad red right now, a little bit of the yellow ochre to get some of the skin tone, a little bit of the cast shadows in there, using the actual saturation of color to do so. So mouth is going to be down here. I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, and we'll go into the top tunic. The cowl, I guess is what would be the right word. I'm going to mix this red to be just a bit darker. So what I'm going to bring in is that really dark, I don't know what color this actually is. It was an ultramarine, but it's more of a blue, and I'm going to mix these two together to get more of a violet. But it will darken the value up a little bit. So I'm going to bring it into this cowl. Light source is going to come from the top down this direction. So things like form shadows or cast shadows will be underneath him. Nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy when it comes to lighting. As you notice, everything already kind of feels somewhat muted, right? But that's okay, I like that. Especially if you do this kind of approach with an underlay tint, it tends to change the colors that you have. So I'm going to go back in there with now more of a saturated red over here. I'm going to go in between these areas. Bring that kind of red saturation up. Let me see if there are any questions here. Seems like we're good so far. We've gone about a good 2 hours at the moment, so I'm probably going to work on this for about another half an hour. Streams, again, there's no real time limit. I just tend to kind of limit it because if it's really long, I think it doesn't really retain the attention of most people. So, especially if I post it on like YouTube, if it's like a 2-hour video, we're going to be like, I'm not going to watch this entire thing, which I'm sure most people wouldn't anyways on like Twitch either too, but I'm sure people are jumping in, jumping out. Again, that's the attention span thing. I'm the same way. You know, I can't sit and watch one thing for the entirety of time all the time either, but unless I'm the one doing it. Going to the blue of this shirt on top. A little bit of reflection there. Let me lift it slightly. By the way, again, as a reminder, this is not a class. You know, this is not me here to tell you what to do, or that these are the answers to things that you guys are asking about. These are based on just my opinions, my thoughts, observations over the many years, a decade of like, you know, teaching, instructing, you know, many different methods of lessons of drawing. There are many things I don't know, especially like when it comes to the effects of whatever, like color or painting. I just know the basic rudimentaries of things. And there are many other people out there that are much more experienced than I am when it comes to that. So take advantage of multiple, you know, lessons or approaches and thoughts. I'm going to bring this down to a bit more of a grayer. So I'm going to use that Dark again. In this situation, I'm actually going to bring in that burnt umber. I'm going to kind of knock it down, keep that dark. Trying to get to a, almost, not a black, but definitely a much darker cool. And this will take a bit of time to build this one up in this section. Because the layering of this paint, it takes multiple layers of it. Because it's so thin, so transparent. In the moment as you apply it, it seems like it's okay, but as you let it dry, all of a sudden it's like it's not what you were expecting. You have to keep working it sometimes. And what I'm working on right now, for people that had jumped on not too long ago, that this is a commission piece for somebody. They had requested a dual piece, which is a Ashitaka from Mononoke and also the princess. So I'll be doing her commission maybe later this week, but maybe not live. The next time I do a live will be this week, but not for art. It'll be more for just Q&A. This is where I do my cards and coffee thing. So if anybody wants to just chat, I just open packs of cards, have a cup of coffee, and talk to people. But next time I do a live drawing won't be till next week, potentially. I say that, but then, you know, like I said, it might be pushed. I'm going to go back into his head and bring a bit of a shadow placement where the cowl is overlapping. As you notice with the brush, I don't really hold it like super tight up close like this. I generally tend to kind of like keep it more of a distance. Yes, it's Honey Milk. I'll be posting this one on Instagram, absolutely. So hopefully you'll see a better visual, you know, of the actual piece compared to what you're seeing in the video right now. The video also is not like 4K, you know, it's 1080p. That's mainly because the video capture device that I have only goes with 1080p. They're really expensive, the 4K ones. So being the fact that I don't really make a lot of money doing this stuff, this is just more for the fact that I just do it. I can't really spend a huge amount of money on digital capture devices if I'm not really making a big income off of it. Okay, let's go to this bottom section again. Maybe one day in the future I'll start to upgrade some of my hardware. The computer is good, the camera is okay. It's a 4K camera, Sony, that I bought a couple years ago. It's just that capture card I have to update. If anybody has any recommendations on like capture cards that are not budget breaking, but that can also do 4K, I would like to hear about them. So I'm sure there are some people in here that do more streaming than I do potentially, or do a much better job of it. I'm coming into the shirt just to kind of like change up the saturation of the blue, just to pump that up a little bit, because again, as it dries, you lose that saturation. But I'm also layering more paint, which makes it a bit stronger now to read. But not just fully covering it. Let me zoom out a little bit. Instagram is still going, so I don't know if there's a cap on Instagram's time now. It used to be only be like, I think a couple hours or 2 hours or something like this. And then they have changed that, I think. I'm gonna go into the background here real soon. These lower pants, I'm gonna drop in the cast shadow here. Knock all this stuff back. Let's go into the area of his hand here. That's his thumb wrapping around the arrow. The arrow will be a different color. Let's make the arrow maybe more like a stark yellow. Here, the actual arrow itself would be more like a darker brown. But I'll bring in that burnt sienna also, like right in there. Oh, this is what it is. A raw umber. That's what it was. I was just thinking about that earlier, like what kind of color was Yeah, burnt sienna that we would use, burnt umber, and then raw umber, color-wise. Let's see, a couple of questions. Where do you draw the line of reference inspiration from plagiarism? Yeah, it's an important question. Um, First, we have to acknowledge and recognize what is plagiarism in the first place, right? Plagiarism, as a definition, basically is to pass off your work when you're literally copying it from someone else's. Okay? So you're saying the work that you generated is truly of your own, yet you may have looked at someone else's piece and directly copied from it line for line, exactly one to one. One to one. So if I did, let's say, a paper, a journal essay or something like this, right? So from there, if I did a direct copy from a paragraph or a section or a page from that and just literally copied and pasted it into my paper, that's plagiarism, right? You're taking someone else's words. Much like in drawing, you're taking someone else's drawing, someone else's creation. So then, where does that line draw? Well, if we go to a show like Comic-Con again, and you see other people doing things like fan art, selling prints and stuff like this, is that not plagiarism? Well, that's their interpretation, right, of a popular medium that is very recognized, and yet is that same character, that same design, but they were able to generate their own version of it. But if they took a poster of someone else's work of that character and directly copied it, then of course that's, the term plagiarism. Another aspect to it is that also, what counts the action to go after somebody if somebody had actually committed plagiarism? In my personal opinion, it's not really so much on like, hey, I post on social media, this is my work, and it's maybe like a little bit like someone else's work, because it was just a personal thing they did. To be honest with you, I'm not really gonna give a shit, okay? But if somebody was selling it, okay, here's a print, and you're selling the prints for like $20 a copy, and it's directly a copy from somebody else's work. Once you monetize it, that's a whole different thing, okay? And you could be making a ton of money off of it, or just a very little amount. But the idea is that once you then put it into a realm of selling a product and saying it was your own, you're stepping into the boundaries of where now you're taking potential business away from somebody else, and that's the inherent problem. So is it okay to do copies and show people and post that kind of work, as long as you recognize and credit the person? I did a study of this person's work, okay? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And you post on social media. Here's my version of the thing that person did, and it's a direct one-to-one. But you recognize where it came from. Hey, this is this person's work, and I want to do a direct copy to learn from it. Post it. But if you then also said, I did a copy of this person's work, so I'm trying to learn, but I was going to sell it. Here, you can buy it here. You don't want to do that. There's just common sense in that sense, right? That situation. So is it wrong to copy people's work? To learn? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Is it wrong to trace? Again, to learn in the beginning stages of your art form? No. I used to copy when I was a kid all the time. If I'm just starting to learn how to draw right now as an adult, is it wrong to trace? I don't think so. Because I'm trying to figure out like how this person did something. It's a learning method. I'm not trying to make money off of that piece I'm making, right? Disclaimers are important. Being transparent is important. But also understanding the separation between learning to educate yourself to then claiming that it's your own. That you're the one that generated the thing from the ground up. But it has to be one-to-one. One-to-one. If that person took that person's illustration, a similar kind of pose, right, of a character, but they completely alter the character's design, there are lines in which, it's all very blurry. It's not black and white as such as you think. So there has to be enough of a change in percentage that it can be still of your own, yet can feel similar to somebody else's. Because what you can then say is, it was inspired by this. I took this image that I saw, I was inspired by it. I liked the way it looked, but you didn't do a one-to-one copy because you switched out many things. Could I potentially pass that off? Again, it kind of depends now in the situation. It's so blurry. Now everybody can interject their thoughts. Well, you still took that pose. You may switch out the characters, costuming, you know, the style set, but it's still that pose. Can you do that? Okay, what if I took that pose and opened up the legs, rose up the arm a little bit, right? And kind of positioned the body a bit more. And then also change everything else about it. I think that's okay, because you were inspired by that pose, but you didn't take it one-to-one. You said, I just like that angle, I like the camera shot of it, I like the position of the body, but I want to take that inspiration a little bit and push it more, right? You could do this. But it's, you know, done on many levels. Now, would I do that directly? For myself personally. And I'm not saying that as other people may do this, that I should say, oh, they shouldn't do that. I'm never going to go after somebody for things that they are doing, unless they're causing harm for people that I know. But either way, it's not my business. If they're doing something wrong, they're going to get caught for it eventually at some point. It's not my job to go after people, okay? I think that's crazy for people to think that way. But either way, I myself personally, I wouldn't do this. I don't need to, right? But for certain people who are just beginning, who are learning to actually, you know, apply this stuff, I can understand why. So I'm not going to necessarily reprimand people or go after somebody by saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not the proper way. Again, there's common sense that you will also learn, and people will tell you. Anyways, plagiarism. It's a touchy subject right now. Okay, it's kind of happening all over. There was one thing I commented about the books from Jake Parker and the other guy Alfonso from before. That whole thing disappeared. And see that in terms of like how people were going crazy about it, and all of a sudden months later nobody talks about it again. It's just mob mentality, which is ludicrous. I'm really into the whole sneaker world, by the way. Okay, so sneakers and things like this I like a lot. And there was a whole issue right now going on. Nike going after tons of people. There was that one guy, Warren something like this, created a bunch of Nike shoes. But that's, again, so close. Plagiarism is in there. It's pretty much the exact same design of the shoe. He switched out a couple things, but he also took copyrighted characters and just put them on there. That's a big no-no. You can't do that. And then people will say, well, Customizer will do this. Well, you're taking an officially licensed product and customizing it as a one-off. You're not claiming it as your own design, right? This is kind of like doing this kind of fan art. I'm not claiming this character is mine. I didn't create Ashitaka. This image is of my image, right? It's my own composition, my pose, my somewhat aesthetic. I'm generating from the ground up. I'm not really looking at someone else's piece to do it. But it is still acknowledging a character that does exist, right? But these things, the terminologies of stuff, the understanding the lines, the blurriness of the lines, creates controversy back and forth. People say one thing, people feel another. People don't know exactly how to talk about it. So they get feelings and emotions involved. As anger and kind of comes in, then people are clouded. And they just say things. And especially as online goes, what you say doesn't come across what you think. People hear it the way they want to hear it. Which is why online debates and conversations or arguments are moot and ridiculous. Because it's not real conversation. It's not a real argument. It's just people shouting back and forth. Trying to win, right? Instead of understand. It has come a time and a point where people have lost the ability to have a conversation. I think in a 10-year period, young people have no idea how to actually have a real conversation with people. Potentially. I'm being, you know, a little bit more over than really what it might be. Either way, I just think that sometimes people spend too much time on things that they shouldn't. Someone asked about archery. Yeah, I'm still doing archery quite a bit. It's just personal satisfaction, personal recreation, something I just enjoy doing. I'm learning that whole thumb draw again. I like learning about the history of the Asian, archery, especially, being Korean, and Korean archery is actually quite big, and I actually didn't know anything about it. And so learning more about that stuff and history of it, because, I grew up here in the U.S., and I was born here, and I have roots, obviously, with family and whatnot, but I don't know much about Korean history and stuff like this. And it's true, people can't have opinions anymore, huh? But it's alright. In time, things will just reveal themselves. The only way to oppose it is to have conversation. People to just talk more. Okay, let's go into the stag up here. He's going to be more that kind of orangey brown. But man, I think once things open up a little bit, people will start to have a real big sigh of relief, being able to actually be outdoors and actually really meet people, right? If anything, that's just a huge part of what's kind of happened. Just people being indoors all day because of the quarantine. It's kind of like messed people up a little bit. The stresses are real. So I think once people can step outside a bit more and feel safe to do so, I think the world will calm down a little bit. Who knows when that will be, right? Take it in stride and just enjoy what you do. Yeah, so this is his palm. His thumb is wrapping around the arrow. It's kind of an awkward angle, but the thumb draw makes it look awkward in general itself, inherently. But the palm is right down below here. It's kind of hard to see because of the dark value, but I have to readjust this. I'm going to actually darken this back part right here in the forearm because his thumb right here wraps around the index finger that goes behind the arrow back part. So it's not traditional like Mediterranean pull, because then you would have the index finger in the hand like this, pulling the string back. But with the thumb draw, it's doing this with the arrow on top of that. So he's holding it down this angle. Which makes it a bit of a problem to draw. So even though it may feel correct to the artist, visually, someone who doesn't know, like, I don't know what's going on there. You know, that looks wrong. Well, that's fine. As long as it works for me. But yes, I will have to adjust a couple things, just so that the viewer has a better idea of context of what's happening. So Art of Danny is saying the issue with plagiarism is that some people don't understand that there's nothing original in these times. Yeah, everything is already created, so it's clear that you have to you will find the same pose or concept. And so yes, there's coincidence. You know, things just overlap and people come to the same conclusion. That can happen, absolutely. So there's no way to know about everything out there in the world and to be aware of it. It's impossible. You can research and you can be, you know, obviously try to cover your bases, but you're not going to catch everything, right? And so if it's an interesting idea, that someone else might have come up with that same idea, or if it's an interesting drawing, someone may have drawn it kind of similarly. That is definitely the way it also does work. So again, that word originality is also not very friendly for what we do. Again, is this piece original? Even if it's a character that does exist, I don't believe so. You know, because I'm pretty sure we can find an image out there that someone has done that is similar to what this looks like. I bet you. But did I know that? No. So how then do we plan for it? We can't. You research as much as you could, and then you do it because it's fun, right? And you know that what you produce is what you produce because you were the one that came to the conclusion. But it doesn't mean that other people can't come to the same conclusion. You felt any difference in the art market with the pandemic? Not necessarily. If anything, it's gotten bigger. Even like the art education format, like the stuff that they do with teaching, has gotten more massive. More people are interested in drawing. More people are interested in classes because they're home all day. Some people have excess income. Some people, not everybody. But because of that, you know, they're willing to spend the time being at home to draw or being home to learn and educate themselves more. Of course, unfortunately, not everybody though. Times can be tough for others. It does seem like a luxury, you know, the idea of taking classes and whatnot now. But I think when it comes to education, it's about investing long term, not right now, which is why it's always worth it. Even if you feel like you're risking time or don't have enough financial support just yet. Welcome, Creative Steve. Appreciate that. Oh, Megan, is that you? Kim Saran? Speaking of archery, there's a great range open to the public near the Sepulveda. Oh, nice. I'll have to look at it. always welcome former students to hang out. Yes, Urban Da Vinci. It'll be on my Twitch channel permanently. I'm going to highlight it. It'll be up there. You'll have immediate access to it starting tonight. It takes a minute to process as an upload, but once that's done, it'll be up there. People on YouTube can watch it within, I would say, in about a week and a half time. So I do repost on stuff on YouTube, but not immediately. I wait at least a week so that the people that are subscribed have full access to it first. I'm making these smudge marks everywhere. It's okay. Now as I finish up on this animal here to a certain amount, again, I'm not completely tightened up on everything just yet. I just want to make sure I get all the big picture of stuff. And then from here, I'm going to move into the vegetation. Then I'm going to kind of tighten everything else up once we kind of get things going. But I don't know if I'm going to do it on camera. We'll probably just go for another maybe half an hour at the most. This has been a longer stream than usual, what I would do, but it's all right. Today was an open day. I had one mentorship student that I worked with, and the rest of the time I was free. So I thought, oh, you know what, I got a commission I got to finish up. So I'm going to work on that right now. Went online. Before this, I was shooting arrows in my backyard. Shot that for about a good hour or so. Stepped out, got some food early before that. Hung out. That's all I did. That is a day for me. Get up, get some food, do my mentorship, went out to get some more food for other stuff, then did my archery for like a good hour or two. Then I thought, okay, what I'm going to do next, I'm going to do my stream. I'm going to do my commission. After this, it's only 9 right now, I'm probably going to play some games, video games. Because I like to. And I don't feel guilty. Because it's a lot of fun. Tomorrow's a long day. I have a full class schedule, so I go from the morning from 10 a.m. till first class start is about a 3 or 4 hour class. Then I do a lunch break in between. Then I do another class at 5 till 8 p.m. Zeitgeist, I am. I was replaying it on the PS5 because they updated a lot of things like the frame rate and whatnot. It's great. I kind of replayed a few of the PS4 games just to kind of see them, but actually I'm playing the basketball game, NBA 2K1. I like sports and stuff like that. So, but I also like tons of different kind of games. I'm playing NBA 2K1. I'm playing the career mode. I'm building a character. I know that for most people they have probably no interest in that here, but besides that, before that I was playing the Tomb Raider, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider or something like that. I never played that one. So when they put it on the PS5, the frame rate, the texture rates all went up. It's a beautiful game. Didn't beat it just yet. I'm at the very end of it. I have been playing Cyberpunk on my PC. That's also like right at the end of it, where before I finish it, I'm just building it, maximizing the character completely. Just make sure I play everything, which I really like the game on the PC. I know people hate it on the console, but I've enjoyed the crap out of it on the PC. All right, let's go into the backgrounds here. So I'm going to bring in some of the branches and the trees a little bit. Again, just some of the local colors within this part. I'm going to use kind of more of the olives and neutral greens to kind of go in there. Because I want it to be more of a warm green, not cool greens. So I don't want to use like pine or something like this. Again, people that are joining in hopefully are just working on things. If you guys are just hanging out, drawing, sketching, you guys can definitely talk about what you guys are working on. You can share, talk with each other. You don't have to just talk to me. You guys can engage with each other. I've considered maybe even starting up a Discord channel for this. Where people can actually be a part of it and upload work and share. But the problem is it takes a lot of management. I don't want to be a moderator, for people like comments and stuff what they post and whatnot. It's just too much work. And I already run like 4 or 5 different Discords for my classes. So I'm thinking about it, but we'll see. So that way if people are coming in here, they can say like, oh, this is what I'm working on. They can post it, Yeah, so the Miles Morales game I do have as well too. I've been playing that intermittently, and I was playing it first. And as I started the basketball game, I just kind of got sucked into that. So the Spider-Man game for PS5 is pretty stunning. I got the PlayStation 5 by just luck. I just found it on Walmart online. They just kind of had uploaded at that point, and I picked it up. So I got lucky. But I'm sure some of you guys already saw that the I had drawn on the cover of the faceplates of the PS5. So doing the branches, doing the trees. I don't want to speak like Bob Ross. I know somebody mentioned that earlier. You know how Bob Ross is actually even more popular today than he ever was? And it's because he does all of the content that I don't know who owns all of his content. I think his family has a partnership with Twitch, so he has a 24/7 Twitch stream of his content as episodes. It's never ending. So in a time you can just go on there and just watch Bob Ross the entire time, and I think that's why he's kind of been at a resurgence again. People are like rediscovering him to a degree. Well, for new audiences that is, but yeah, especially like an online streaming, it's pretty crazy. And then of course now I think other streaming platforms are getting him, like Netflix I think maybe has it, or some other one has Bob Ross's all the episodes and whatnot. So he's become really popular again, which is cool because I grew up with him being in high school and stuff like that. We'll watch it on PBS. Oh, is that what it is, Creative Steve? Okay, yeah. I knew it was something based on family. My gosh, he must make a lot of income from his dad's content. That's cool though. As long as it continues to inspire people out there to paint. The guy I used to watch a lot, not necessarily, I used to watch Bob Ross a lot, but on PBS there was another one. It was a guy who did a lot of carpentry. He would have he had glasses on and had the more like a classic kind of a folded hat and a mustache, but I can't remember his name. And he used to run this carpentry show, and he would just build furniture. And I would get up in high school during the time when I was a kid, not kid, in my 20s. Why am I saying 20s? Teens. And I would get up in the morning, like at 6 in the morning. I'd be waiting for the bus, and before I leave the house, I would watch like a 15-minute episode of that. But it was always so relaxing with the way he would speak and the way he would put together furniture. I don't know why, but I really liked it. Just looking at on the camera overview here and there. I'm going to bring in a bit of the yellow ochre to the underside of the plants over here. Just doing a general wash. I'm going to kind of adjust some of the values as I go. I could use things like gouache on this one as well to kind of bring in some, stuff in the background or lights maybe, but we're not going to go super intensive right now. I'm going to bring in a little bit of the dark blue with the green, yellow ochre, and just kind of intermix some things here and there, move the paint around with my hand. Norm Abrams, is that the name? Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look him up again. If I can find YouTube videos on there, I'm going to go into a deep dive on that, just watching. That's awesome. I'm glad I discovered that here, the name again of the guy. Because I couldn't remember his name for the life of me. Not to say I did a really big research on it, so I probably could have found it eventually. But I'm glad I found out now. For anybody else who wants to watch an awesome show on building furniture, check that out. Norm Abrams. Do you have any tattoos inspired from artists or from favorite tattoo artists? No, I don't. I have a lot more of just Polynesian work. So the Maori people from New Zealand is where the tattoo work I get. I visited New Zealand twice, once back in 2010 and once 5 years after that. And I went to go visit. I just knew people there. The first time I went was to actually meet up with a friend who was a tattoo artist. He's Tongan. He found me on Facebook, social media. This is back in like 2008. And he asked me to teach him how to draw. So I traveled to New Zealand to teach him how to draw. that wasn't the only reason. I wanted to go travel there, so that was just a chance to like have to stay with somebody. So I stayed with him and his family for like 10 days, and I explored New Zealand. And then he tattooed my chest afterwards. We got to know each other. I got to know how he thought. He got to know who I was as a teacher. And so the tattoo he gave me, the one on my chest, was from the first trip. The one on my arm was done by two tattoo artists. One is a woman named Trisha Allen. She's a sociologist, but also studies Polynesian culture. She's based actually in Hawaii, and she knows a lot about different Polynesian cultures. Maybe wrong. I'm saying that wrong. Might not be anthropologist is what I think she is. So she studies a lot of cultures and whatnot, and she does tattoo work traditionally and trained as well too. The other person was her apprentice, Jordan, who's also based in Hawaii, but he would visit the California areas or different parts of the U.S. and they would do tours and tattoo work, and I was able to reserve a time with them to get some work done. But this is way back before 2008. It's like I can't remember anymore, honestly. But I got to Polynesian work mainly because I really appreciate and look up to Polynesian cultures, especially with the way they're connected to nature and water. And I've talked about this in the past streams before, but I just really favor Polynesian art as well too. But of course I'm being careful as to what I put on my body. I don't want to step on anything in terms of like cultural stuff. So as I work with tattoo artists, they're able to generate the story for me and using more common shapes and common lines and not family symbols and such. So you gotta be very mindful of that. Of course, no face tattoos when it comes to Maori work. That's reserved for just people from that culture. The face mokos, right? All these shapes and things, I know about them because I know what they mean. The korus and stuff like this, and the manga pares. But they do represent something very specific to the story of things that I experienced. And I think that's why I love Polynesian tattoo work so much, is because it's about storytelling, capturing moments and your transitions of life and things you experience, things you do. Other kind of tattoo work is great, like the Asian tattoos and things like especially the tattoos from Taiwan. The Aboriginal people from Taiwan have a very strong tattoo history, which they've only recently discovered again. The Aboriginal Taiwanese, were more like people from the Polynesian islands. So if you look at the history of where they traveled from, Southeast Asia, from Burma, from Taiwan, to these people that are traveling for thousands of years, transitioning to places like the Cook Islands, to whatever the case is. You see them traveling all the way up towards Hawaii, and so you see all the tattoo work being somewhat interconnected to a degree. But if you look back onto the kind of the stemming points, like people from Taiwan have an amazing tattoo history, and only the women from Taiwan can tattoo. Only the women. And they're mostly face tattoos, blocks and shapes and forms like this. And it's pretty incredible as studies. It was stripped away, that initial culture, because of the Japanese invasions during the 30s and before, so tattooing was made illegal. So they kind of lost that art from that. They would destroy all the records and whatnot. Horrible times, but that's just a reality of history. But they're starting to only rediscover it again in the last maybe 10 years. Piper, that's my cat's name, yeah. Have I been to Hawaii? I have, several times. The typical kind of, cliche vacation spots. But I would love to go back to see more of it. I do know people out there. But honestly, I really prefer the Polynesian islands and stuff like this. So I've been to, Tahiti, and been to New Zealand a couple of times. I would love to go to Tonga. I would love to go to the Fijian Islands and stuff like this. But some of the other islands I'd love to see. We're starting to noodle a little bit here and there, so I don't want to overwork this thing. Let me zoom out a bit more. I'm going to adjust a couple of small spots in the figure in terms of clarity of view. A couple things when it comes to the backgrounds I still need to touch upon, and there's still a little bit of work to go for, but it'll be another, I would say, half an hour at most. But I think we're going to be ending here real soon, because I think it's enough to go by when it comes to the stream. I've been talking 2 2.5 hours straight. And that's typical. That's how I normally work. I tend to keep going. Whenever I instruct, I can teach like 10 hours straight and keep talking. I've done this for years. But if anybody has any last comments, questions, things you want to discuss, I welcome it. But if not, we'll be ending here in just a minute. Next time I come back on, I will try to hopefully do another maybe Monday session. It's kind of nice, but we'll see based on what I'm doing. And I might do another commission piece, which I have to kind of finish up on if I don't do everything this week. If I do all of them, I still will draw something else. Glad you were here, Steve. Appreciate that. And of course, you guys can follow me on Instagram on Peterhanstyle if you need more information about when I will go live, because I usually post a story there. My Twitch stream is under the same handle. Of course, I will be live streaming on Instagram at the same time. But for you guys who've been hanging out there, I appreciate you guys just kind of chilling and watching. I know that certain questions I may not have answered to because I'm only answering questions on Twitch. This video will be kept on Twitch, the stream and feed on there. It'll go on YouTube on my channel within a week and a half time. So anyways, I think it's about as much as I want to do at the moment. One small thing inside the white patch, a little bit of color here and there, just to break that up. Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys, in terms of just chilling with me, having a conversation, and being, mature. Because a lot of the questions that were coming in here were actually very strong and hard questions too. And those kind of conversations or questions based on my advice, is something that you can just take with a grain of salt. But still, they're interesting thoughts to have. And I always appreciate you guys' time to kind of also spend here to work on your own pieces, So do share them. Do share your own piece. Don't share my thing. Share your thing. So, get as much of this momentum and mileage as built up as you can as you go from week to week, month to month, year to year, Absolutely, guys. Thank you again. So I'm going to stop the stream right now. I will catch you guys all on the flip side. So enjoy your weeks going into the weekend, and hopefully I will see you next week. If you don't see my cards and coffee, that will be on Friday. Friday evenings in Pacific time is when I do the opening of cards. Just answer more questions. I won't be drawing, but you can just come and enjoy to hang out. All right? See you guys next time. Appreciate it.